how's it going? Yeah, so normally I don't show my face on my own channel a lot. I mean, it's not like it's a big thing, like this isn't a face reveal by any means, but I figured I'd just add a little personalized touch before we kick off the video. But I just wanted to say, so far it's been a great few episodes of my channel. Typically, once we get so many in, I like to call it a season. And then I'll just compile all the videos I've made in that chunk and throw it up as a compilation. So if anybody just wants to binge watch stuff. But more importantly, I am going to be absent, maybe, kind of. I'm going on a cruise to Alaska with my family, and we'll be stopping in Canada along the way. I'll be accompanied by my beloved Kaylee. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and I figured I'd just kind of update my audience, as to speak, in so many words. This is just a compilation of like the videos we've made since the last compilation video. So season 2, so to say. Kind of will give me a chance to step back for a week or two, or however long I normally do it, and you know, focus on some family time with myself. I hope you enjoy my content so far. The influx in subscribers has been really motivating. And I've got this next one coming out. I think we're going to come back with a bang with an hour-long video. But yeah, I'm just asking for a little patience. I'll probably make a vlog of my Alaska trip so you guys can live intravenously through me. I hope you enjoyed this compilation. Probably nothing you haven't seen before. Or if you're here from like a one-off video, this may be something for you. So yeah, if you're new, like and subscribe. But this is really for like the OGs. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you enjoy the collection. Prior to entering an unassuming coffee shop, a man donning a gray trench coat deconstructs his umbrella, giving it a good shake to remove the remaining drops as the rain continues to pitter-patter around him. Opening the door envelops the man in the warm, intense embrace of the coffee aroma. Already knowing what he wants, and the fellow patron at the register having just finished and moving to the left, he quickly approaches the barista. "Hi, what can I get you?" "Medium cold brew, please. Easy ice, if you'd be so kind." "All right, easy ice, and can I get a name?" "A name?" "Yeah, a name." "My name?" "Well, not necessarily. You see, what do you mean?" "I suppose you could give whatever name you'd like, but whatever name?" "Really?" "Sir, this really can't be new. I could give any name. I could be anyone." "Sir, please, I just need a name for the order." "Dave." "No." "Stephen." "No, George." "No." "Zerzik. Alien Conqueror. The possibilities are endless. I could be anyone. Be anything." "Okay, well, Zerzik, your cold brew will be ready in a few minutes. That'll be 1423, please." 1423? For a medium coffee? "Sir, I must assure you, it's very good. This is highway robbery." The man pulls out his wallet and pinches a $15 bill. Handing the bill over, Zerzik tells the barista, "Keep the change." Eventually the name Zerzik is called. The man grabs his cold brew and exits the cafe. Deploying the umbrella once again and holding it in his left hand, the coffee is in his right. Despite the coffee being half an hour's wage, it was good. Zerzik would give the barista that. The man continued to walk, thinking about the interaction with the barista. It's not long after delving into this rabbit hole of thought that the man's phone begins to ring. With his hands full, he can either place his umbrella on the ground, subjecting himself to the rain, or put his coffee down, which, despite his confidence it will be okay, the idea does not sit well with the man. It's at this moment he grabs the attention of a nearby pedestrian. "Excuse me, miss?" "Oh, yes?" the woman asks hesitantly. "Would you mind holding this for just a moment?" He extends the coffee to the woman, who absolutely does in fact mind. "No, are you dense? I have places to be. I can't stand here holding this." "Pretty please?" the man asks in a pleading manner. "Fine." The woman takes the $15 coffee and begrudgingly holds it. The man takes out his phone and looks at the series of numbers. Pressing the green answer button, he holds the device to his ear. "Hello?" "Hello?" "Hi." "Yeah, hi, who is this?" "You called me." "Yeah, but it's standard practice to confirm that one has the correct number." "How does one standardly confirm one's number?" "Well, what is your name?" "This is the second time I've been asked that today. What are the odds?" "High, and probably won't be the last." The person on the other end responds methodically. "How fascinating." "Not particularly. Now, your name?" "Sir, I really must go," says the pedestrian. The woman hands the man back the coffee. He places the phone between the crook of his neck. Held with his head and shoulder, he takes the cold brew from the woman. The man pondered this question momentarily. He had grown tired of being Zerzik, the conqueror. Maybe something with a bit more humility this time? "Yes, this is Bill in accounting."
The man had no idea where the name had come from, but where does any name really come from? Oh, I must have the wrong extension. I was looking for Will in accounting. Seeing as how you're in the same department, could you pass on a message? The man thought precariously about the situation. He didn't know when he would see Will in accounting next, as he's been on vacation for a week. However, he did take on the mantle of Bill from accounting, and all its dominion. Of course. The man clears his throat. Thanks. You're a lifesaver. Tell Will that we need the final budget summary for the Dotson account by EOD. It's very important. You can count on me. Bill from accounting. Thanks, Bill. A chime can be heard indicating the call has been dropped. The man manages to return the phone down to his pocket while somehow keeping his umbrella and coffee in an alternating state of change in both hands. With the phone returned, Bill in accounting continues walking. The conversation had dried his mouth. Instinctually, Bill goes for another sip of coffee, only to be met with an unpleasant surprise. The cold brew Bill had purchased only moments ago, for an exorbitant price, had been completely emptied. Deducing what had just occurred, Bill has come to the understanding that the woman he had asked for help drank his entire coffee in mere moments. Bill's quick to anger, throwing the cup. Damn it! I can't believe I didn't notice. I swear I'll get you. Bill stopped for a moment. He realized he'd never actually gotten the woman's name. Perhaps this is why the baristas at the coffee shop gathers names. For revenge. Frustrated, Bill looks at the empty receptacle on the ground, which once held his savory liquid energy. It's at that moment Bill also noticed the Sharpie used to write the name becomes visible, as the dark liquid has since been drained. The name on the plastic cup reads Xerxes, COA. Oh heavens, that's embarrassing, Bill says to himself. I'm getting frustrated over a coffee that isn't even my own. Not so much relieved as humbled, Bill finds the nearest waste receptacle and disposes of the empty cup. The pseudo-fit Bill delved into had built up a rather strong appetite. Using his keen sense of smell, Bill locates a nearby pizzeria. Coffee and pizza weren't a particularly good combo, but then again, he didn't actually drink the majority of the coffee. Looking both ways before crossing to the side of the street where the pizzeria was located, Bill makes the quick walk before opening the door and entering. The restaurant, which needed narrative clarification, was a sit-down host-directed style establishment, rather than a front-counter order-sit-anywhere establishment. The hostess greeted Bill. Welcome to Piccolo's Pizzeria. How many? The woman's gaze meets Bill's, and a look of recognition crosses her face. Coffee guy? Bill looks around, even going so far to look behind him. Are you talking to me? You're joking, right? The hostess says incredulous. I beg your pardon? You literally asked me to hold your coffee while you answered a phone call like 3 minutes ago. I think you may have me mistaken with someone else. No, I drank your coffee and then I came to work. It was for sure you. Ma'am, please, I'm very hungry. Looking down at the woman's uniform, he sees a name tag. Sarah, please. I'm very hungry. Whatever. How many? Just me. No surprise there. There's a bit of a wait. Can I get a name? Well, I'll be darned. They were right. Who was right? The man on the phone. See, I told you, we just talked to each other. The man had grown tired of Bill at the same rate he had grown tired of Xerxes. My name's Sarah. The woman's expression dropped to stone-cold apathy. She was done with this man. Sarah, huh? Yep. That wouldn't have anything to do with the fact that I'm wearing a name tag with the name Sarah on it. Nope. It's funny because Sarah isn't even my name. It's my coworker's name. But you have a name tag that says Sarah. Correct. So you are Sarah. Incorrect. My name is Rudy, and I just forgot my name tag at home today. Can I have it? Have what? The name tag. No, but my name is Sarah. Be that as it may, my uniform requires a name tag. A name tag with Sarah on it? Traditionally, no. Pretty please? It doesn't make sense for a Rudy to be wearing a Sarah name tag. Look, man, I get what you're doing. What's that? No, really, I do. This is a wonderful exchange and series of circumstances to prove that names are concepts developed to tie a looser, broader sense of identity into a single defining word. And albeit your journey shows the names are arbitrary in the everyday, raising the question, is the self arbitrary?
The ego, the id.
My guess is that you're doing it for some kind of demonstration, that it takes time to build a sense of identity, but only microseconds to destroy that persona. Or maybe that's not right either, the way you've jumped around, name to name, rebuilding and starting in the middle of some kind of contrived character for a lack of a better word.
A new personality.
A new name. A new life.
And sure, this could be another endless take from Renee Margaret's Treachery of Images. The depiction of a pipe in an artistic rendition is surely not a pipe, as you are not a Sarah, or I.
A Rudy.
Or are you an existentialist who thinks, therefore you are? The idea coming from a Descartes, but a Renee nonetheless.
I'm just trying to get a pizza.
But who's I? Who are you? Are you really Sarah? And is this what Sarahs are supposed to do? You thought my name was Sarah till I informed you otherwise. Or how are we both Sarah if we perform different tasks, have different egos? Are we both not Sarah? Or is only one of us really Sarah?
What are the limitations of a Sarah? Is Sarah an omnipotent and present being of absolute power? Could that also be a Sarah? Or more questionably, the Sarah? Does the reality align with the perception? Is the damnation of a single consciousness starting to set in? The burden for advocacy of one's reality falls solely on the individual. When you perish, when the world forgets not your name but your being, will you still be Sarah? When no one speaks your name or damns the void of time for taking you too soon, then will you still be Sarah? Will you have been anything at all? Are your ripples in time embedded with...
Hear me speak, Rudy of Piccolo's Pizza, and hear me well, vile slinger of sauce, void whisperer, rot rodent. I, like every other sentient being, did not choose this existence. I did not choose my embodiment to be cast from the mother void, to walk and influence the waking realm, to hurt, to love, to act, and to be inactive. I did not choose to be a voice in the silence, a light in the darkness. I was cursed with the blessing of life, with the rest of the solemn flames burning brightly with me. I am not of my own being, not from my will, but the will of nothing at all. I ripped my name and every name I bear from the void with me, deeming it worthy as a title to the complexity that is my existence. I do not deserve of being confined to such a thing as a name. Only a word would spare you the disservice of remaining nameless. This force in the peripherals of your comprehension. Live in fear, Rudy, who bears the renowned title of Sarah for a time. For I am beyond your understanding. You are simply a facet of my being. Without me, you are nothing. The half-radiant philosophy you preach damns you. I desire pizza, had I not more. Or more importantly, had Sarah not wanted the pizza, or even Cersei not wanted to answer the phone call, you'd simply be an afterthought lasting no longer than a microsecond. I am your reckoning. I am your doom. I am your rapture, delivering you from a blinded, evil mindset. I am Sarah.
Oh my god.
I am Sarah and I want pizza.
In today's economy, there are only around 1,000 companies who have surpassed 100 years of existence. That's a substantial amount of time, and with that time, most companies make a few mistakes along the way. Pepsi is one of those century-old companies, and while doing my research, I found that whether it be financial or ethical mistakes, they've pretty much been in trouble for longer than they've been in the clear. I've taken a look at video games, cameras, writers, and even your very soul. So why not do a video on a company this time? In this video, I'll be talking about Pepsi and some of the history behind this now monster of a conglomerate, and how even when you're on top, you can still shit the bed. Sorry, we don't have Coke. Is Pepsi okay? To give some background, Pepsi, the drink, originally started out as Brad's Drink, created by Caleb Bradham in North Carolina back in 1898, as a health soda, right up there with your health cigarettes.
Parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?"
Bradham saw that Coke, the product, and also Coke, the drug, was super popular, but wanted to make a drink of his own without all the cocaine. After Brad's Drink was created, Bradham would sell the syrup to those who came to the pharmacy he owned and operated. Similar to today, you could get drinks and snacks at pharmacies back in the 1890s. Brad's Drink would be rebranded to Pepsi, as Bradham was still firm on creating a health-inspired drink to compete with Coke, the drink, not the drug, but also maybe the drug? Pepsi because it was believed to help with indigestion, or for my fancy people, dyspepsia. Bradham would die at the age of 66 in 1934 due to long-term illness, but not before witnessing Pepsi file for bankruptcy twice in the same year. What happened was, in 1923, Bradham thought the price of sugar would spike, and bought a ton of it. The price of sugar did not spike, and it was a huge financial loss. On the brink of collapse and with two new owners, Pepsi would take advantage of the Great Depression and strike gold with an ingenious idea: cutting prices. I know, daring.
It was during this time Pepsi would begin selling their drink in 12-ounce bottles, substantially more than that of Coke's at the time, and also for a reduced price. Pepsi would release a jingle for this innovative change.
Trickle, 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 Pepsi Cola hits the spot. 12 full ounces, that's a lot. Twice as much for a nickel too. Pepsi Cola is a drink for you. Nickel, 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 nickel.
And the rest is history. Really, for a while there, Pepsi was just another company with a rocky start that made it big. There's a rumor that at one point, Pepsi had one of the largest armies in the world. How this came about was that Pepsi during 1972 wanted to break into the tightly controlled Soviet Union market as a way to quote-unquote spread American culture. Unfortunately for Pepsi, the Soviet ruble was essentially useless, or in a way not secure enough to take as actual payment for their products. Thus, a barter system for the two parties came into play. Pepsi Cola for Stolichnia vodka. This vodka would be sold in the States, and the revenue would be used as compensation for the Soviet Union's Pepsi orders. Eventually, the demand for this particular vodka decreased to a point where it was no longer sustainable. This led to talks where Pepsi needed something else in exchange for their products. What could be the next logical step from vodka in this exchange? Oh yeah, everyone knows it's decommissioned warships that can be sold for scrap. Of course, how silly of me to forget. This is a twist on what actually happened. The resulting trade would in reality have the Soviet Union build shipping freighters for Pepsi. Ultimately, this deal would never go through as the Soviet Union would collapse before it could be realized. Pepsi was pretty cool with it for a second. I'm sure this was only done with the approval of the American government to drain communist resources, but the integration of culture is something I'm never opposed to. Life was good. Pepsi saw the potential in national markets and the future was looking bright. But then, the 1990s happened. Pepsi, being eager, saw their first hitch in the rise to all-time stardom with Madonna in 1989. Sure, they had to battle Coke for market shares and customer base, but at the end of the day, they were the expected competition. They would make plans and marketing strategies to combat Coke. What happens, though, when you can't point the finger to anyone else but yourself? When it came to Madonna, Pepsi paid for a $5 million commercial that would never see the light of day. That is until one September 33 years later. Link can be found below. The actual commercial was nothing crazy or outrageous. So you're probably sitting there, asking why didn't the commercial get pulled? Prior to the commercial's release, Madonna's music video for Like a Prayer was dropped, and depicted her kissing a priest. The Vatican, and I guess a few Pepsi drinkers, lost their shit when they saw that Pepsi was working with this devil worshipper, so Pepsi canceled the ad. Pretty cowardly in my book, especially in a few years from now, Pepsi will drop another terrible ad going in the other direction, and failing miserably too. In the grand scheme, however, despite the cowardly move on Pepsi's part, they only really shot themselves in the foot by wasting $5 million, and a couple hours of Madonna's life, ending by just sort of fizzling out. In 1992, Pepsi, wanting to break into the Filipino market, had started a little numbers game that would go down not only in Pepsi history, but the history of the Philippines as well. The Philippines are not on the US dollar. Can you imagine that? Instead, they use pesos, which are separate from Mexican pesos. Pepsi, as part of their promotion, would print numbers on the bottom of Pepsi bottle caps, and then have the national news read a set of winning numbers out every day. These winning numbers would have a chance of winning cash prizes, with the grand prize being 1 million pesos, or 40,000-ish in USD. For a minute there, it was going good. People were buying Pepsi, getting into the whole lottery system, and having an overall blast. That is, until the grand prize. Yeah, somehow, somewhere along the line, at the biggest and arguably most important number announcement, someone got the numbers wrong. It said that Pepsi had a tight control on which numbers would be printed, but I guess not tight enough. This surmounted to a result where there were multiple winners, resulting in a total payout of $38 billion. Pepsi, only being worth around a speculative $8 billion, could not pay the winners. If you think people got mad about Madonna, you should see what happens when you fuck with their money. Riots soon began under the 349 alliance, leading to 30-plus instances of confirmed truck flippings and several large hostile gatherings outside of the Pepsi bottling plant. Executives would receive death threats, and eventually the tipping point would be a homemade bomb going off and killing 5 people. During this time, Pepsi offered each winner $18 in good faith. This was good for some, but not all, and the case was escalated to the Philippines Supreme Court. Those who held out on payments received slightly higher amounts, but nowhere near the million pesos.
Eventually in 2001, the courts ruled that Pepsi would no longer be responsible for the incident, and they have no obligations to pay out any further settlements. This whole story is wild, as one of the suspects arrested by the Filipino police during the riots allegedly stated that Pepsi had paid this man to incite violence to portray the rioters as violent terrorists. A Filipino senator stated that rival bottled drink makers could be the ones to actually pay this man and take advantage of Pepsi's error. Pepsi is said to have paid at least around $9 million in damages and payouts. As of 2023, Pepsi sales in the Philippines' annual revenue was around $700,000 USD. Coke still dominates there with a market share of 63%. Pepsi, thinking that the competition went so well in the Philippines, decided to do another one here in the States, while they were still dealing with the fallout of the Philippines. Now this one got shot into the limelight after a pretty good Netflix documentary called Pepsi Where's My Jet got released. I'll touch on this one briefly, but Pepsi launched a marketing campaign where Pepsi products could be traded or redeemed for points. Similar to a school fundraiser where they give you a prize book and tell you to bug your loved ones to buy cookies or whatever. This was announced in the form of a video ad, or a daytime television commercial if you remember what live television was like. I hope I don't have a super young audience, but at one point, binging was just called marathons. In this ad, the Pepsi point system was explained, and the big reveal at the end showed a Harrier jet for 7 million Pepsi points. One factor of the Pepsi Point program was that points could be purchased with currency after a certain amount of points were obtained through the purchase of a Pepsi product. A man by the name of John Leonard would eventually come to the conclusion that he could own his own $23 million jet for just $700,000, or in other words, a 97% discount. Pepsi, obviously, like the number fever escapade, could not fulfill these terms. Leonard, not having this, took Pepsi to court to either get a jet or an equal payout of said jet. The courts would rule that the commercial was not a contractual agreement on the behalf of Pepsi, and Leonard was entitled to nothing. Which is bullshit. They showed prices all the time even after this whole thing. That would lead those to watching to think that this is the price of the product. Look at this one right here. I remember this one very specifically. I am not a judge, but it seems like this whole thing could have been avoided if Pepsi just accurately priced the jet as the proper exchange rates of Pepsi points. As if the jet is priced at $700,000, then Pepsi should have to pay out $700,000 for the jet they cannot provide, as this is the established value of the cost of the Harrier jets over at Pepsi. If only they put the more accurate 230 million points, life would be a lot easier for them. Jumping back in time from the 90s to the 80s just for a little moment, this next story involves the king of pop, Michael Jackson. During a long day of shooting a commercial, both the director and Jackson grew tired of shooting, and the expenses of the pyrotechnics at play were beginning to grow to a rather pricey amount. The director, wanting to make this take the last take, would have Michael stand unusually close to the point of detonation of these pyrotechnics. Once the cameras were rolling, the detonation of the explosives would engulf the singer in a cloud of flames. Jackson would sustain second and third degree burns to his scalp and rush to a nearby hospital. There, Jackson would receive a treatment and recover with minimal complications. Pepsi and Jackson would settle out of court for $1.5 million, where Jackson would donate the money to the hospital that treated him. The commercial did air and was considered a successful ad, unlike this next one. It's 2017. It's been a turbulent year. The focus on racial tensions are on a rise, and the Take a Stand rally in Baton Rouge following the shooting of Alton Sterling, who was killed by a police officer, is further proof and relevant to the story. Pepsi, wanting to be a cool woke company, made an estimated $100 million ad that got them into some pretty hot water. Picture this. There are multiple documented instances where people are pulled into police lines and arrested or just straight up assaulted. I ain't on the ACAB hype train, I'm just stating what happens at protests that get a little wild for the city's liking. America doesn't have a great rap when it comes to the treatment of minorities. If you haven't heard about this, welcome to Earth. Sore subject, lots of nuance and ethics and philosophy and discussions on police states, and you know how it is. So you know what Pepsi did? They got Kendall Jenner, yeah, the Kendall Jenner, I know guys, so cool, to star in a commercial where she breaks the picket line to give a cop a Pepsi. Let me set the scene. Actually, we'll do a play-by-play. Opening scene, Pepsi cracks, cello on top of skyscraper. Crowds protesting, peace? Cue Kendall. What is she doing? Quick guys, she's modeling. Very relatable. She's a model. It makes sense. Great save, guys. Another cello. More modeling. Pepsi sip. Pepsi lean. Angry at peace. Really angry at peace. Band practice. And, this? Tears off privilege. Steals Pepsi. You go, girl. Cop wouldn't do that. Could have something in it.
I don't even know anymore. Oh, it's Def had something in it. Go Crazy, Fade to Black, Close Set, Crocodile Tears. Yeah, so there's a few problems here. Most of them I played up, but yeah, not taking a side, or sometimes referred to as fence sitting, is not something you should do if you're spending $100 million. You should make a point. This commercial has been memed to the moon and back, making an appearance on the series The Boys and SNL, which I can't show here because they will remove this video. I've done it before. I've narrowed the reason why this commercial was received so poorly down to about 3 main problems out of the 1,000. Number 1, there's not an actual protest taking place. They're having a peace gathering. This is for peace, and if anything, is like a festival at this point with musicians. One might call this a music festival? The cops are in the most bare bones uniform and honestly look like they're just there to make sure people are safe and don't get trampled. Number 2, Kendall is implied to have no knowledge of this protest, therefore not knowing what she is supporting. It appears she's just jumping in line because of a chance to be seen doing something down to earth. At least, that's the impression I got. Number 3, Aisha Evans. Aisha Evans was protesting in Baton Rouge during 2016. She did a similar action to Kendall in this commercial, or I guess Kendall did what Aisha did. However, where it differs, instead of being cheered on by all, Evans would be placed under arrest. Maybe it was the Pepsi after all. That's what Pepsi wants me to think. These 3 points paint the full picture that Jenner, and in a larger picture, Pepsi don't actually care about any social movement, but rather the profit that can be made from trying to have consumers identify with them and their supposed beliefs. Yeah, Pepsi's kind of nuts, and as recent as November 2023, they're being sued by New York because improper disposal of plastic waste alongside the Buffalo River. So this probably won't be the last we hear of Pepsi. If you enjoyed this video, thank you so much. I appreciate you watching till the end. I know it was a shorter one. Merch can be found in the description down below. If you enjoyed it, let me know what you think. Yeah, please like and subscribe. I'm Gideon, and peace out. The frustration begins to build. Your face is hot, your stomach empty. Again and again, little problems poke their ugly heads into what would otherwise be a decent day. You feel the expanse of energy in your chest and you tell yourself it's okay, that you're okay. But it's not. You're pissed. Being cut off at least 5 times today because your local DMV just keeps renewing the licenses of 1,000+ elderly people diagnosed with glaucoma. The coffee you've gotten every day from the same place this whole year managed to give you a poor excuse of burnt bean water. Minute. They're nothing. You know these problems don't matter, but still, they get to you, like flies continually landing on your skin after being swatted at. You need a release. Some way to let out all this hate before it's let out on something with feelings or substantial value. Jerking the wheel into the repeating mirage of telephone poles seemed a bit on the extreme side. Looking around further, you notice an empty field full of dead yellow grass. Pulling over and exiting the car, you look around, utterly devoid of life. Not even the sound of bugs or the wind. Perfect. Before you know it, it's happening. You're screaming. You've become so fed up with all of it. The only thing left to do is to scream until your heart's content. First, a minute passes, the screaming continues. Face blistered red, tears running down your face. This is no longer about the coffee and the fucking traffic, but so much more. Years of abuse taken and given. Every heartbreak, every ounce of disappointment you've ever felt, every emotion that had to be buried and tucked away in a neat little box. It boils to the surface in this one series of screams. An attempt to finally let the poison out, to purge yourself of the hate you've held on to. By the end of it, you're broken, torn down and collapsing from all what was once holding you up, gone, even if temporarily. You are nothing but a shell. Sentience begins to creep in, and soon the almost sacred act that has just occurred is diminished down to just a moment where a person is screaming in an empty field. You get in your car and begin to drive. A thought strings its way across your mind. You push it off for an instant, only for it to return a little further down the road. You don't feel better. I imagine a lot of people here think they can perform one action or hear one thing, and the problems will all go away. If I can just get this raise at work, if I can just get my car fixed, if I can just make this relationship go on, it's always if I can just do this one thing, my problems will be solved. Who can blame us though? It's our natural instinct to think we can make one-stop shops for everything, even our mental states. Sure, lashing out or getting the thing you want provides a temporary moment of release, but the problems just don't go away forever. There will always be something coming down the road, whether it be our choice to run it over or have it hit the car anyways is irrelevant. Conflict, not even conflict, but strife, is unavoidable. As the Buddhists say, all life is suffering. I get it. Life is hard, especially your life, because no one is going to know exactly how you feel in that moment or what you've been through. Only that you've been on your own journey to wherever this whole thing called life is leading to. You've made the decisions you did because of your own personal experiences that led you to believe this was the right course of action. You can't blame yourself. The past is the past, and you try to do the right thing.
I would honestly say we've felt this sensation since we were cave people, only you didn't feel too bad about smashing stuff back then. In a way, it's almost like as we go through life, we pick up miles on our soul, and we can't bounce back from trauma and all the bad like we used to. I get it, you feel old, your past self may be able to kick your present day's ass. It's okay, mine too. For now. But let's talk about some methods I've heard or even practiced in years past, and break them down into a 10-ish minute video. If you're struggling, feel free to drop a comment and reach out to those around you. You're all unique as subscribers, but I've noticed a trend that we've got a real positive vibe around these videos, and I'm sure y'all could find connections with each other. One of the ways I've noticed that some might deal with their frustrations is by bottling it up, deep inside where, one day, when you least expect it, it'll probably explode, ruining possibly your wedding, birthday, and important occasion. It reminds me of that one quote from Anger Management. There are two kinds of angry people, explosive and implosive.
Explain something, Dave. There are two kinds of angry people, explosive and implosive. Explosive is the kind of individual that you see screaming at the cashier for not taking their coupons. Implosive is the cashier who remains quiet day after day and finally shoots everyone in the store. You're the cashier.
Sure, you may not even lose your shit one day, but the weight you carry around has negative effects on your quality of life. One of my many parents, as I'm a product of divorce, says, "Sorry, it must be the brain tumor," when forgetting very forgettable movie quotes. I bet she wouldn't remember that Adam Sandler one that I just posted. But that had me thinking. Some of the nicest people in the world who live their lives the good old-fashioned way, no smoking, no drinking, no family history, always seem to be the ones that get the ultra-rare inoperable brain tumors. Is it because they held it in for our sake? Who knows? It's a weird, sometimes cruel world. Letting out our strife is healthy. It's healthy to get angry, to get sad, to feel things. You just have to find the right way to do it. Some, like yours truly, like to direct their anger into hobbies. This, despite being what I went to school for, is a hobby. It is my passion and also my life goal to do something along the lines of video production, but it is not my career yet, and it certainly is something I like doing in so many words. Almost like an itch that must be scratched, I get antsy after not making a video for a while. When not working on videos, I feel as though I'm wasting my time, and that can be a problem. Despite how easy I make this look, I do dedicate a lot of time to these videos that come out almost weekly. It takes so many hours to write up a coherent script, record lines, edit the recording, find footage, find music, and throw it all together. I've noticed if I'm really going through it in life, bad day after bad day, I'll throw myself into my work using the action of making videos as an escape from the real world, rather than a productive means of release. It becomes obsessive when all you can think about is editing and your next video. This example doesn't just extend to video editing. It can be really anything, like building model airplanes, working on cars, painting. All can be used as negative forms of escapism rather than a channeling medium for the buildup of the day. One of my other parents told me that we as a people have lost our tolerance for feeling bad. We used to be focused on survival, where your next action or thought was propelled by a desire to survive. But now with all of our accessible resources like water, food, and a warm place to sleep delivered to us, we focus on little incongruities of being human. Everything is fine, all your needs met, and goals and aspirations are going accordingly, but something's off. You don't feel something you should. You don't feel great, but at the same time, you're not in a state of agony either. In full honesty, it's a state of discomfort from the simple fact that you exist. The discomfort from the fact that you take up space and can feel every surface area of your body, or that you can at all times focus on your breathing, your tongue, or even the contents of your stomach, can all be a bit overstimulating. All this to say, it's okay to feel kind of shitty. I think this relates to how we are constantly chasing that next personal victory and that next goal, that one more thing as mentioned earlier. By setting aspirations in motion, we unknowingly are signing ourselves up for all the struggle that comes with these lofty goals, and even the potential for failure. Want to join the NBA and ball out? Well, guess what? That's pretty tough. You can do everything right, never miss practice, diet, work out, go the extra mile down to the T, and have the potential for failure never leave your side. You have to give something to get something, and how it feels more times than not is that we're giving a lot more than what's being returned. Aspirations and dreams are a large part of why life is worth living. We look for purpose, for meaning, in our time in the material. There will always be that feeling of want, the next big win, and with that, the feeling of active disappointment when the progress of these goals doesn't feel immediate. There is this corresponding relationship dependent on how much you pursue the goal that then affects the baseline discomfort. If you really want to think about it, it's almost ironic. To want to improve your life, you have to take on negative elements. It seems counterintuitive, but with goals that require dedication, you can't accidentally achieve greatness. It has to be taken, to be desired and actively pursued. Not to mention that what I broke down into seconds regarding joining the NBA is a nearly lifelong pursuit of a singular objective that, like I said, could end in failure. What then? What happens when it seems like you just wasted your life in pursuit of something that will never happen? Is it a life wasted? I don't know. Maybe. Probably not, though. It's important that you remember we're here on the planet to enjoy ourselves and all that is offered. Sure, it's awesome to achieve greatness, but isn't greatness already achieved by having a life well lived? It sure wouldn't feel like that in the moment you found out that you fumbled your chance at the one key moment. You would probably want to scream till you're hollow too. In a more positive light, wasn't it great to even be given a chance at all? To go farther than the other 99% of people who want to do exactly what you do? The silver medalist will have a harder time than the bronze coming to terms with this, but there's a whole group of people who would walk away with only the memories, and that's enough for some. I wouldn't say to stop shooting for the stars, but it helps to be prepared for the fact that everything may not go your way, even when you really, really want it to. Because in the end, we can't really know exactly how others feel, but there's pretty strong evidence to suggest that the silver medalists wanted it almost as bad as the gold, and probably even more now because of the silver. Desire will always be there, even if it's stronger at times than others. The pursuit may make you want to pull out your hair and scream to the heavens, but hey, eventually you'll be dead, and you won't get to do the good along with the bad. And it's unavoidable. Everyone dies, so make the best of it and see where it goes from there. Scream, cry, laugh it all away. Do whatever it takes to see it through, and then keep going. My name's Gideon. Peace out. The CIA killed your mom. No, not really, but they totally would for national security. That's crazy, and more importantly brings me on to my next point. National security. Security of the nation. What is that? Well, in short, no one really knows. It sort of just depends on what the government feels like it means that day. Thanks. Please like and subscribe. Okay, well, I guess there is some information I could provide if you held a gun to my head, which may be the case after this video drops. To begin, national security is a very American idea, first and foremost. Dictators aren't traditionally known for assigning fancy political terms to their actions beyond adding a democratic or People's Republic in their nation's names. Dictators sort of just do the things they want and call it governing. That's too simple for even us Americans. Unlike our surface-level performance-based politics, we as a shadow government love espionage, wet work, and, more importantly, gathering domestic-based counterintelligence. National security, that little golden ticket I mentioned earlier, gives the government a somewhat moral backing to do pretty much anything they deem necessary. You see, the King in Black, the alphabet mafia Capone, the CIA, is still made up of people, human people, Human people who probably want to do good with their lives, have families, and keep the world safe for their newly had families. At least, the American world. Seeing as humans feel things despite it be probably better if we didn't, it's hard to get behind inherently bad or morally questionable situations. It doesn't take a genius to tell you that. Nobody really wanted to be called a Nazi after 1942, and it wasn't just because they were the quote-unquote bad guys to the Allies who had won the war. Back to national security. It's pretty much anything involving the safety of the American people and ongoings of the status quo. This is a broad term, kept so deliberately. You could dive down a conspiracy on how national security is kept so broad that it takes away the rights of the American people on premise alone. For example, if someone, a journalist, had information that the United States was using a legion of mole people working as slaves, national security would dictate that the CIA gets to work and make sure that person, the journalist, doesn't say anything about the mole people slaves. More reasonably, you find out about a certain conspiracy diverting mass government funds for unethical projects, or something like that. The CIA can be assumed to give you a government-funded execution in the form of two 10mm 8-cent lead projectiles. Pretty much anything that would cause the United States to crumble, even scandals, fall under national security. This is a double-edged sword. You can't really be against domestic terrorism without some length of what we call national security becoming involved. Or at least, that's what the propaganda is telling me. The Central Intelligence Agency has been known to use this principle of national security a bit liberally in the past, however. The CIA has been doing sketchy ops since they first popped up in 1947, from well-known scandals of MKUltra to Bloodstone. However, it's with the global spread of information and the internet that we as a species have turned into meerkats, alerting others of potential wrongs in the world near instantaneously. It also doesn't hurt we all have supercomputers in our pockets that would literally melt the face off anyone back in 1947 if you showed them TikTok for 15 minutes. All this to say, we've gotten pretty good about exposing some rather fucked up stuff the United States government's been caught up in. Without further context, my name's Gideon. Let's talk about why the CIA would totally kill your mom, and some of the other not so cool things they have done. When writing this video, I wasn't sure where I was headed, but finalizing the script will give a brief history of the US involvement in South America and the Middle East. Our story starts following the largest organized terrorist attack ever committed on American soil, also known as 9/11. At the time, current President George W. Bush pulled a Reagan and announced the official declaration of America's war on terror. If you're growing up as a youth during this time, it was a really interesting period because America had a very unique identity developing. I like to call it Hummer America because the Hummer vehicle sort of took off at an all-time high following 9/11. And with its 10 mpg gas mileage, it really stood for what we were: big, consumptuous, and making an impact to the planet. Becoming more militarized than ever, this wasn't like Vietnam, where Americans were being forced overseas to fight supposed communists. America had been attacked, and in the following year more Americans would enlist in the military than any other year to date. The United States would also increase the military budget an additional 50% from its current state. So, who was our enemy? Well, the figurehead of a group named Al-Qaeda, a man by the name of Osama bin Laden, sometimes spelled with a U, had been accredited with organizing the hijacking of 4 airliners and the destruction of the World Trade Centers. The Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and the US once shared a common enemy as the expanding Soviet Union was beginning to encroach on the Middle East, something both groups weren't incredibly fond of. After a series of conflicts, revolutions, coups, and just regime meddling in general, Al-Qaeda would turn its sights on the US for sticking its hand in Middle Eastern affairs as much as the Soviet Union, if not more, following the end of the Cold War. In 1992, a hotel bombing would occur in Yemen, where US troops had been staying in transit to Somalia. It wasn't that bizarre at the time. The bomb could have been pretty much placed by anyone, and the bomb went off long after they had left. However, they were suspicious that Al-Qaeda may be changing their target, and this attack would be claimed by bin Laden in 1998, years later. The target change would be apparent when in February of 1993, Al-Qaeda would commit a bombing on the very same trade towers of 9/11, killing 6 and injuring 1,000. In 1994, the Taliban would make their way onto the scene. A brief history lesson: Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are different. Al-Qaeda has global goals of fucking with America and the West. The Taliban is like the equivalent of a more successful US Confederacy, minus the slavery and wanting to take only a piece of the country. The Taliban want the whole thing. Prior to 1994, the nation of Afghanistan was going through a little something called the Afghan Crisis, something accredited with the actions of the Soviets at the time. A nearly 20-year run of 3 to 7 groups infighting and creating civil wars after the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, leaving a power vacuum. The Taliban would then step up and seize the city capital of Kabul towards the end of the crisis, becoming the controlling party. While dominating, the Taliban promised Afghanistan prosperity under the group's rule. Most Afghanis, tired of the lifetime of fighting, accept the Taliban as the ruling party everywhere but in the north. The Taliban then proceeds to enforce radical Muslim ideologies, burning the infamous opium poppy fields and requiring women to dress in full traditional Muslim garb. Despite the Taliban having made promises of prosperity, climate change would affect millions that year, creating refugees who would attempt to find asylum in Pakistan. During this time, the Northern Alliance, led by Masood Khalil, an opposition group to the southern originating Taliban, began fighting back in attempts to retake Kabul. In the early 2000s, following a U.S. embassy being bombed by al-Qaeda, President Clinton requested expedition of Osama bin Laden. The Taliban, Afghanistan, disrespectfully declined to do so. This leads Clinton to declare al-Qaeda a terrorist cell. Throughout the early 2000s, al-Qaeda would continue to pull shenanigans and affronts the world by blowing up Buddhist statues and assassinating Masood, the Northern Alliance leader, by having a member posing as a journalist to get close. Then, in 2001, al-Qaeda would commit one of the most heinous actions in American history, the September 11th World Trade Center attacks, where 4 airliners would be hijacked by 5-man teams. 2 would collide with the Twin Trade Towers in New York, New York. One of the planes would crash into the Pentagon, and the 4th and final plane would crash land in a Pennsylvania field, killing all on board. During the time, I was 2 and my family was in Mexico on vacation. I have little to no memory, but apparently it was very difficult to get back into the country. Imagine that. Following the attacks, the world goes apeshit on Afghanistan, and more specifically, the Taliban. America and its allies start carpet bombing the shit out of the Taliban strongholds, invading and occupying relentlessly, causing a Taliban retreat from Kabul only 60 days after the 9/11 attack. Spoiler alert, we'll do all this little dance for 20 years, and then dip out. But for now, from 2002 to 2004, the US continues to establish a firm hold on that sweet, sweet oil, freedom, and help them poor little Afghans set up a US-approved democracy. The Taliban is pushed further south, and the future is looking bright. In 2006, George W. Bush, back on the scene, has a heavy message for the US people. During this whole feel-good, beat-the-bad-guy moment, the US establishes the existence of black sites. What is a black site? Oh, nothing really. You shouldn't even worry about those. They're just these sort of secret government-operated prisons where trained enhanced interrogators can shove bamboo rods up pee holes of suspected terrorists. Now, honestly, like most ideas on paper, black sites were pretty kosher, in my opinion, despite the bad name. The US legal system is infamously slow compared with terrorist organizations not having to cross bureaucratic red tape. And these terrorists can't be kept in Gen Pop anywhere in America, they'll get killed in a second. Even the Marvel villains don't fuck with Al-Qaeda. This creates a losing battle for the war on terror 99% of the time, hence black sites. Seeing as how the task required the utmost secrecy, the administration gave it to the agency with the best track record, indiscretion. That's right, the CIA. The world's a messed up place, and we can't always afford to play it nice, especially when airplanes are going into government buildings. So it's not the capture of suspected terrorists and then eventual quote-unquote information extraction from said terrorists that make black sites so controversial, to me at least. It's what happened after. Where did it all go wrong? What was the slip-up? Well, the CIA doesn't stay in its fucking lane, landing us in hot water over and over and over and over again. What I mean by that is not everyone's going to be on board for black sites. That's totally okay. What's not okay is setting up shop despite the people in the country rather have it not be there. And I'm not talking about the ones in Kabul, the heart of the action, but may I direct your attention to Poland. In 2003, 2 CIA agents arrived in Warsaw, over 4,000 kilometers away from Kabul, with $15 million. Their goal? Start a black site that wasn't in Cambodia or Thailand. Why neither of those places? Snakes. Even the CIA doesn't mess with snakes. CIA needed a long-term base where extensive interrogation methods could take place over a lengthy period of time. Poland was nice. It had an established base of operations ready to go. All the CIA needed was an inn. And that inn was money. After this whole situation came to light in a humanitarian investigation, both Poland and the US had no comment on the situation, denying accusations. In 2014, however, Poland would nut up and say, yeah, we had one. Fuck you. I was willing to give them a pass on Thailand and Cambodia until you really start to think about what the CIA noticed after a couple of weeks of operation. Let's cut back to the White House. The Bush administration was going out on a limb by establishing these black sites. The public would have questions, and Bush needed answers for this. This would require the CIA to send updates and reports on what was going on, down at each black site, just to mitigate some of the possible damage. I know what you're thinking. Oh no, they aren't going to send the reports. Well, that's where you're wrong. They were sending the reports, just falsified ones. Incredibly falsified ones. First and foremost, it was pretty quickly found out that torture doesn't work, at least physical, like waterboarding, #trademark. The person being tortured is more likely to confirm whatever bias you provide or just make something reasonable up so you stop drowning them. The CIA didn't like this revelation in human psychology, and so they straight up lied. Just went, yep, the torture is working wonders and we've got lots of good info we can't send you for national security, privileged information, all that. See how that works? Additionally, the CIA members at these black sites were found to be doing things like experimental torture methods that the US government couldn't, or honestly didn't, approve of, dodging oversight and creating roadblocks for when the Department of Justice came snooping around. Prisoners are also held years at a time, often making information, if any, extracted obsolete and outdated, even if at one point valuable. Ultimately, none of the interrogations led to information on Osama bin Laden, despite having prisoners who were involved directly in 9/11. In 2006, when Bush confirmed the existence of black sites, public outcry was enormous. Bush stated that the prisoners were not entitled to treatment based on the Geneva Convention, which makes sense, but were not having any of their Geneva Convention rights violated. This statement was followed up with a remark that most of the current black site prisoners will be transferred to Guantanamo Bay. In 2007, it would be discovered during an investigation that the CIA had destroyed a large portion of interrogation tapes for national security. How convenient. Guantanamo is still in operation to this day, and everyone seems to have just accepted the CIA will try and stick to this one location, most of the time. Who knows? It might be a national security threat that requires one in Paris or Chicago.
Black sites aren't new news. I figured I would just give you my thoughts on them to start out this whole shebang. In short, I don't see what ripping out a fingernail in Kabul won't get you that ripping out 4 in Poland will. Waste of money and unnecessarily cruel compared to a simple execution. More importantly, the US willing to hold a trial for Osama bin Laden, but not the 173 people held in the same conditions as terrorists and released without charge in 2005, tells me that the Middle East and the rest of the world may have a point by saying these are human rights violations. Especially since the CIA destroyed these tapes most likely first. So how did these prisoners get here? Well, the US prints out these pamphlets with a picture of a person they want, or apparently just have lying around in their database. A picture of possibly 173 random brown people that the CIA decided they'd fuck up their life with. Then, a $5,000 bounty is posted underneath, kind of like a messed up One Piece. Once the pamphlets were thrown together in Photoshop, they were printed and dropped in Middle Eastern towns. This would inspire the Pakistani army to start transferring over prisoners en masse. Currently, as of today, 2023, there are 30 people in Guantanamo Bay, with approximately half of them never to be released or transferred, as being too dangerous to do so. Execute Americans, not terrorists. Got it. Some notable members, and I'm going to mess up these pronunciations, are Ramzi bin al-Shib, who was pretty involved in the 9/11 attacks, organizing information and deciphering code, Mustafa al-Hawasi, who financed or acted as a money manager for the 9/11 attacks, and Ammar al-Baluchi, who did a lot of the legwork and acted as the face for the US-based al-Qaeda operations when picking up money. In a lot of ways, the people in the prison deserve the hell on earth man has created, waking up every day to be beat with hoses and waterboarded till the sun goes down, all just to do it again the next day. But what about those people who were innocent? You ever hear about Mexican Joker from South Park?
You're traumatizing them and teaching them to fear the US government.
Correct.
Okay, let me try to put this in terms you people will understand. You know superhero movies, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you remember how they always create the villain? Some random person who, when they were a child, got taken from their parents and locked away? And the kid was just left to sit and plan revenge? What you're doing here is creating a Mexican Joker.
This right here is how these terrorists are created. Black sites, like I said, are old news. More recently, the CIA had their tools of the trade leaked on WikiLeaks in 2017. Over 8,000 documents were uploaded detailing the CIA's capabilities of doing, like, watchdog type stuff, like shutting down cars and compromising any mobile device and operating systems. In my opinion, this is pretty obvious. However, at the time, Mike Pompeo, director of the CIA, was pretty salty, calling WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service. Scathing. If you can't already tell, the CIA has some selective filters when it comes to picking who are and who are not terrorists. Sit back and get comfortable because you have no idea. Everyone knows about the Iran-Contra affair, and if you don't know, where he's basically Reagan, the president, and North, the colonel, sold arms to Iran, the country, and gave the money to a death squad by the name of the Contras in Nicaragua, another country. The Contras were a right-wing militant group fighting the left-wing commanding communist militant group established by the Soviets, also by the name of the Sandinistas. In short, the US used to run the country of Nicaragua from like 1910 to 1930, while the Panama Canal was being built. Why this country in particular? Well, to prevent Nicaragua from doing the same thing as Panama, the US wanted the only canal. After the US finished their occupation, they left the country in control of Anastasio Somoza Garcia, a president/dictator, but we only say president because the US only calls presidents to dictators when they're communist. Enough people didn't like the current president regime as his sons kept taking power, so the Sandinistas, a socialist party, supposedly another opposite political ideology of America, start the Nicaraguan Revolution in 1961. They win and gain some influence. Huzzah. Though it's been heavily disputed, it's allegedly believed that the US created the Contras by spreading propaganda with the artificial pumping of unease. It's been denied by the US every time by officials, but the positive relationship that we shared is undeniable. Personally, I believe the US did create the Contras because it wouldn't be out of the playbook for the CIA to overthrow democratically elected officials through artificially organized coups. The ideas of communists being so close to us didn't sit well with Reagan, and he wanted to do something about it. In my humble opinion, the presidents of the years 1951 to 1999 were all playing a game of whack-a-mole with communism. Here's the thing, the USSR, or Russia at the time, was crazy communist after the Russian Revolution of 1917 as the Bolshevik Reds versus the Tsarist Whites turned the whole nation upside down. The age of Stalin has passed, and a series of middlemen leading to Gorbachev were in charge at the time. Unlike Gorbachev, the middlemen were super pro-Stalin policies. This essentially meant creating satellite states, but with all the easy prey taken in Europe, South America was next. Reagan was seething at this. Unfortunately for him, the Boland Amendment had been passed in 1982, specifically forbidding the support of the Contras to overthrow the government of Nicaragua. Rats. Iran had an arms embargo against it. Why? Well, in the Middle East, there are two major sides, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Both are very similar, hence why they hate each other, kind of like the US with Russia, outside looking in. The US picked Saudi Arabia for whatever reason, Saudi Arabia probably with a more stable climate, versus Iran, where they had a series of government changes sometimes spanning from the US's actions in the Middle East. Additionally, it would be Iran that currently has a closer origin story to America, which never really rubs America the right way. In 1905, the Iranian constitutional revolution would occur, creating a democratic style of government. However, due to a famine, the Persian coup of 1921 would go down, placing Reza Shah in power in 1925 till the 1940s. During this time, World War II would pop off, and England and Soviet Russia, on the same side, occupy the recently changed nation of Persia, knowing it now as Iran. They did this because money, and Britain at the same time, had all ownership of oil in Iran, which is insane. World War II ends and Mohammad Mossadegh is made prime minister. Following the election, Mossadegh nationalizes Iran's oil rights. If it's one thing you don't do, it's touch the white man's oil. So following this, the US specifically, the CIA, and I guess England, help in a group project kind of way to do the next logical thing. They overthrow a democratically elected official, inadvertently causing the death of hundreds of millions. Drop the CIA in Iran with a budget, a dab pen, and a Hellcat, and you'll get a new government by the end of it. Agents would hire the most dangerous mobsters in Tehran, paying them to go create mobs in favor of the recently removed Shah. Hell, the CIA would carpool people just to these events in vans with juice boxes and orange slices. Mossadegh would be removed from office following the Iranian coup of 1953, where he would die no later than 5 years after his arrest under cruel conditions. In his place, the US would put Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, I think is how you say it, as Shah Reza. Reza would continue to westernize the country at an aggressive rate, so aggressive in fact that the traditional conservative Muslim population didn't want any of that jazz. So, enter a familiar name. Ayatollah Khomeini, a political rights activist, starts to organize from 1963 to 1979, starting the Islamic Revolution and overtaking the Pahlavi dynasty and taking power as leader. During this period of time, American civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. would also stage his own movement for the equal treatment of races. King would sadly pass after an assassin shot him in Tennessee at a Memphis hotel in 1968. It's a common conspiracy that the CIA are to blame for the death of MLK. However, no substantial evidence has been provided for this claim. What has been provided is a falsified joint op by the FBI and CIA that has not been redacted in any way, trying to insinuate Dr. King was a wife-beating alcoholic. It is interesting to think about because no one shot the Ayatollah, and he ended up changing Iran to this day. Anyways, this would send shockwaves across the Middle East, as for some reason, this revolution over any other in Iran really shook up the Saudis' faith in their own regime. Additionally, the Ayatollah represented a primary Shia sect of Islam, which has long had a divided but traditionally peaceful history from the Saudi Sunni sect. It didn't help either that the revolution was religiously motivated, giving the Ayatollah a claim that Iran was in fact the true Muslim Holy Land over Saudi Arabia. A primary difference between the Sunni and Shia sect of Islam is who the Prophet Muhammad's disciple was, if he even had one. The claim that the Saudi Arabia is the Holy Land of Muslims stems from the locations of two cities, Medina and Mecca. Medina being from where the Prophet Muhammad started to grow Islam and where the Holy Blackstone was placed uniting the surrounding tribes. Mecca is where Muhammad the Prophet is from. The Ayatollah would continue his revolution not recognizing the national borders by spreading support to specifically Shia groups in other countries, like Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq, under the rule of Saddam Hussein at the time, didn't like this and also saw the opportunity for growth. Hussein would declare war with Iran in 1980, trying to expand. Iraq would start losing this whole thing. Surprising enough, Saddam should have just used those weapons of mass destruction he had. Saudi Arabia would step in and start supporting Iraq against Iran. This would continue to fizzle for about a decade until the US stepped in 2003, high on its war on terror. The reason for doing so was the US did think Iraq possibly had nukes or was making them, and that Al-Qaeda had shown a presence in the region. Cutting back to Reagan at the 1984 election where the Sandinistas held power, things sort of sizzle out with peace talks held soon after, and South America was no longer the talk of the town for the big girls upstairs. The CIA has been caught doing a lot of not so great things, some might say far worse than killing your mom, but what's important is that it was all to keep America safe. Supposedly. I've got some new merch up on my website. I don't really expect anyone to get it, especially at 1,000 subs, so, but I figured I'd let people know. It's important to plug yourself. Plug yourself on your own content. Why not? And if you guys could watch this 4 times each, then I would be able to monetize, which would be cool. I don't know how much money I'd make, but it'd be cool to monetize, because then people could donate during streams, and maybe that'd make me stream more. I don't know, either way, please enjoy this Wendigoon clip as I say peace.
Remember, kids, the next time that somebody tells you the government wouldn't do that, oh yes they would.
Something's wrong, right? Things haven't been what they used to be in a while now. Or are you finally noticing things are just wrong and always have been? It can't be pinpointed in any meaningful way, but you feel it in the depths of your being. Things are amiss. A toad, when placed in a boiling pot of water, will immediately jump out. However, a toad placed in a lukewarm pot will gladly cook itself if the temperature is risen to a boil. I often think of this metaphor, or analogy, or whatever literary device you'd like to call it, when thinking about us as a species, humans, and our relationship with the tolerance we possess towards harmful environments. This is a broad reach metaphor, so to narrow it down, I'll talk about war as an example, then lead into how we can become disconnected from society, and even globally impactful events, ignoring the boil, so to say. Disconnections from the ones and things around us are not directly tied with the wars your countries wage, and the problems we create on the national level or even global, but the personal. Climate change is too obvious, but I guess the topic also relates to the frog metaphor mentioned earlier. I'll be using war as a transition point to show the human condition on loneliness, moreover, and touch on specific examples of varying scenarios. Being a small creator, I can analyze or really just voice my opinion on war without caring what my subs have to say. In fact, I hope I have subscribers who differ in opinion than my own. Echo chambers are shown to turn creators into douchebags. Recently, not that recent, on the world stage is the Israeli-Palestinian crisis that's affecting us globally. Last year it was the Russo-Ukrainian, but I'm not involved/informed enough to feel I have a right to share an opinion on who's right and who's wrong. If you put a gun to my head like an IDF soldier though, I would say that from an outsider's perspective, looking in, it's a David and Goliath story where there's 2 bigger Goliaths throwing fat stacks at a smaller Goliath as he pounds David, the already defeated David I might add, into further submission. Like I said, this small position I hold allows me to speak freely, going on without the fear of losing income, or quote-unquote fame. I don't want to take a detailed look at any particular war, but war in general. I'm not a journalist, these are my takes, they're not objective, and they're not biased free. This video, as with most of my videos, isn't the undisputable fact, but there will be no misinformation on my part. This video is also sponsored by me, because let's be honest, not even Adam and Eve would sponsor this jazz, especially since I already said the demonetizing I word. Not that I'm monetized, but still. With introductions out of the way, let's get into it. My name's Gideon, and I'm going to tell you why you're lonely. As I understand it, every conflict has sides. Not picking a side or abstaining is still making a choice. We're too well connected for you not knowing what's going on to be as consequence-free as it has been in the past, at least to the outsiders. In this conflict, in every conflict really, there are the soldiers, fighters, warriors, whatever you call them on both sides. Whether they be labeled terrorist, fascist, freedom fighters, or liberators, they're two sides to the same coin. I had a history teacher in the 7th grade, Mr. Burke, who was the first to tell me one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And that had me really questioning the mentality that, damn, we sure got lucky with the good guys winning every major war. What are the odds? Well, if you're leading a country, right, then hi, the odds are high. The victors write the history books. That's another quote. He didn't tell me that one, but yeah. To simplify, the positions of an exert of forces clashing to justify an end goal is how wars are fought. This is a heavily reduced rendition of the nuances and complexities that come with war, boiling a person's identity down to those who fight. Limitless factors during these times produce ethical dilemmas left and right, unaccountable human lives reduced to numbers. Expanding further, soldiers of one side could very well be slaves, mandatory conscripts, child soldiers, prisoners of war, etc. This leads me to state not all fighting forces are the same or equal, but all wars rather have a force of fighters. There are thousands of ways to end up in a war you didn't want or need. Even Whitey isn't safe in the land of the free if they need to enforce, well, some freedom. We're going to war means you're going to war. Soldiers are only one factor, one side, when it comes to the art of mass violence, and despite whether we can admit it to ourselves, the end goal of fighting is to make something bleed. If reduced down to its simplest elements, a war is created to cause casualties to an opposing force. To declare war is to declare the temporary, or even permanent total annihilation of your opponent's goals and resources. Wars can span from several factors, but in the last 100 years, we've really limited ourselves down to national borders, ideologies, and financial gains. The leaders, chiefs, commanders, NFL teams, generals gathered in black masses. Whatever you call them take the shape of politicians, and these are the people who are most vested in the end goal completion of whatever conflict is going on. The United States, and really most first world countries, have a bit of a war profiteering problem. Have you heard of this? When it comes to American politicians, it's on both sides of the Democratic and Republican parties. In order to avoid singling any group out, I'm just going to point the finger at everybody. You may have heard of this small little company called Lockheed Martin. They got in trouble for bribing Allied nation officials so their governments would buy the F-104 Starfighter, an overall halfway decent plane whose only real downfall was its poor turning ability. The planes weren't the problem in this scenario, but the bribing sure was. I work with a former Marine, but there really is no former. Once a Marine, always a Marine. We got to have some first-hand accounts with Lockheed while building air defense radars over in Afghanistan. Needless to say, they were not as good at assembly as they were with designing. The quote that my coworker mentioned that stuck with me as he held a crescent wrench up to the operator was, "Do you know what this is?" Lockheed wasn't the first to engage in this type of shady behavior, but is the most obvious being an arms manufacturer / defense company. This video isn't a financial investment guide, but if you want to make money off war like all the cool kids, or better yet, a US senator, you may want to do this thing called fractional ownership of these very expensive stocks right here. During events like the attack that occurred October 7th in Israel, you can expect some kind of rise in stock price. They're diversified enough you'll find some kind of profit, which is sort of the entire point. Here's a list of politicians, or chiefs as I refer to, who invest in Boeing, one of those companies who profit off war, which is funny in a not very funny way when we saw a bump in the stock price after the whole attack on October 7th. Coincidence? I think, well, probably, but you decide. Let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Take all the sides you want, whether you're for supporting or opposing Israel. It just looks really bad when you've got cold hard cash on the line. It feels like one may not be doing it for morality's sake entirely. What I mean by this is one's judgment may be clouded, turning from the less lucrative ceasefire, disbarment, or peace talks for a full-out military supply line / conflict. When war is declared, it's done with the understanding that people will be killed as a result.
As callous as it sounds, this is even the objective on occasion. This is where our next group comes in, the calculated casualties, or really, the victims of war. Countries like Russia that are going through a population crisis can't afford to lose many civilians, as the nation's people are thinned out as is. Countries like Japan were so good at war, they're not allowed to play anymore, so there's a zero tolerance for that sort of stuff by the nation's civilians. Countries like the US can't lose any civilians not because of a population crisis, and not because we were too good. There's actually a bell curve that if you make it to the other side, you're back on the board as a warring nation. Here's the chart. See the US, see Japan, and over here on the left you can see all the countries going through civil wars. Pretty well concise. The US can't lose civilians because if we're sacrificing special programs like universal health care and free college education, we expect some unique perks, especially with the amount we pay in taxes. If people were dying left and right from foreign IEDs in my own neighborhood, I might have more to say about the trillion-dollar military-industrial complex and all my taxes they keep losing. However, I live in America, and the only threats we face these days are domestic, like the white supremacists and eco-terrorists, which we still can't decide if it's a gun problem or a mental health problem, as if somehow they're mutually exclusive. Don't believe me on the terrorist groups? Look it up. Here's a chart to start you off. That's 3. The fighters, the leaders, and the casualties. There's one more subsect of this little war political compass I'm building, and unlike the other 3, they don't even have to know the war's going on. The bystanders. A war, despite having global consequences, does not have battlefields spanning globally, leaving those 7,000 miles or 11,265 kilometers for the rest of the world out of the realistic harm's way. Y'all should just get on the Imperial. I use a foot to measure things. 12 inches, a foot. An inch? What the fuck is that? This gives a privilege to not be in the shit every day. Having the plagues of warfare consuming your every thought isn't a realistic consequence. Instead, the everyday for the people away from the war takes over, and we become a frog in a boiling pot of water, not really worried about our survival or the war, but how this pot could be bigger, newer, and better. This is where most of the disconnect happens. Let's say you're born in a country where wars managed to evade your borders for at least you in your parents' lifetime. I was born in the US in 1990X. I've had my fair share of the US's treatment of the Middle East creep in, but there's this disconnect of Vietnam being your grandparents' war with a 20-year run. Gulf War maybe could have been your parents', but relatively it was quite short and not as grand scale, versus yours being the Iraq-Afghan war spanning another 20-year run, assuming you're 18 to 25. You live through a couple of conflicts happening on the other side of the globe and think to yourself, well, nothing changed for me from the last one, so I really shouldn't worry about this one. This was especially true with those who fall into the Gulf War time frame. If you look back, did you really give 2 shits about the Somalian Civil War, or did you even know about it at the time? Probably is well covered. Eventually on this slippery slope, a select few who, whether they be uneducated, uninformed, or conscientious objectors that believes in pacifism, just throw up their hands and say, who cares? It's terrible, but understandable. These people who don't have the luxury to care for global affairs have their own first-hand problems that are a more immediate cause for concern than a war that doesn't seem any different from the ones in the past and the ones coming down the pipeline. I'm not a psychopath, I care for my fellow human, and the sacred rarity that is all life isn't lost on me. I pick up the bugs and let them outside even with the risk of being bit on the horizon. I condemn the actions of all violence, so when I'm told people are slaughtering another across the world, it's very alarming, even for those who wouldn't be considered quote-unquote my people or tribe. You may think you can abstain from a war, boycotting the global affairs that seem to have no direct impact. However, that isn't entirely true. You can ignore the gas prices easily enough. Coming from personal experience, I never look at the price of 2 things, beer and gas. Of course, I keep these 2 purchases, direct activities, and effects separate, but what about the people? In this scenario, a person has taken a laissez-faire approach to the outside world and trade for the closer realities of family life, one's career, and personal aspirations and dreams. It's harder to ignore what's happening when your immigrant coworker that you've worked with for the last 5 years is suddenly gone, having to go back to fight for what he believes is worth dying for and what you believe is unimportant. I worked a seasonal gig as the scrawny teen who tied Christmas trees to your roof one winter, and I met a father whose family was back in Iran. That same winter, something popped off over there and he had to go back, telling me he doesn't think he'll be able to get back to America. And it was good working together. I never saw him again for the rest of the 2 years I had worked there. I think about him sometimes, and at the very least, we were work buddies. This is a disconnection of circumstance. He chose his family instead of his shittiest job here in the States, and I can't blame him. And just how some of us don't think, or in other words care, what's going on in Iran, he probably doesn't give 2 shits about little domestic terrorism, gun violence situations going on here, much less know about them.
The creeping effects of what you think was once irrelevant come back to bite you in the ass, especially if you're not updated on the potential ramifications. Refugees fall under the human casualty domain of my previous analogy and are often a hot button issue, especially for Europeans. Not just Europeans. Refugees, not too dissimilar from America's border crisis, spanning from asylum seekers, which are totally different from refugees, is a complicated issue altogether. I think a lot of the time, those opposed to accepting refugees are often in the mindset that these quote-unquote outsiders want what we have. They want to bring their war-torn beliefs and ruin our peaceful nation. Well, guess what? And I'm only going to say this once. Most people only want to come to your shitty country for the sole reason that you live in a place where bombs don't fall from the sky every day. Most folks are pretty simple. We need so little to survive to even have a halfway better life. And there are those that have enough to share. More than enough. Participating in this whole thing called life already sets you up with a responsibility to try and help your fellow person. You benefit from those around you. You get running water, utilities, grocery stores, housing. Not because those around you wanted to solely cater for your needs, but because we care for our fellow person, and the concept of a grocery store alone proves that you should try and help others and be a contributing member of society. As evil as we make capitalism out to be some days, one of the perks is that you're rewarded for your contributions to the bigger picture. However, one of the downsides is that freedom to spend and share rewards can cripple our ability to empathize with those who are unable to do the same. Looking back to what I just said, your contributions are rewarded. Rewarded by who? Other humans who have found what you have done has increased their quality of life. In a way, it's a contrived formula where currency, fiat currency might I add, is a reward for how you've made lives better. Then why is it those that live in excess of this currency often don't seem as down to earth as the rest of us? I have a theory on this. Bill Gates is one of those people, but why is that? His developed software has greatly expanded the technological evolution of humanity, but his lack of personal social skills along with some rather dicey friendships has thrown him into this light of being a shadowy cabal member set on world domination. This is because, in my belief, all the Elon Musk and Bill Gates of the world have made a rather poor decision with their self-image. I believe billionaires have equated their financial standing with how much people feel they enjoy their work, or better yet, how much they are liked in general. I think that however much is made off the Cybertrucks will just be an ego boost to Musk. Furthering on the consequences of being connected, calling a senator and sending a letter is great if you're firm in your convictions toward what you believe in. But to those who wish to prevent mass human suffering, it's hard to be a partisan to a singular side. It's frowned upon to say, I don't like these aspects of both sides, I like these on both sides. The world is a majority black and white in the court of public opinion. There's right and wrong. You essentially set yourself up for living in doubt about the choice you made either way. What if you supported the wrong side? What if you didn't support any side and now you live with the guilt? Sometimes it's easier to live under a rock and hide from the world thinking it'll be over soon enough. This is also often the case when trying to connect with the outside world on an individual level. And in a lot of ways, this is what this boils down to. It's a big scary place out there and it's hard to feel helpless so far away, or know that any day now, a war you didn't want or start will end with nuclear Armageddon. Are you going to blame a single mother just trying to make the rent payment stack to the ceiling for not being able to give as much attention as possible to a war that for her is on the back burners of her mind? Additionally, most countries have a war-torn history. Would you blame a survivor of the Bosnian War for not wanting to become involved in another war of borders so soon? This relationship of war and disconnect can be translated to the everyday if the war is made to be a social or familial issue. If you're barely surviving check to check, then meeting up with friends and family becomes less important than getting hours in at work to feed and shelter yourself. If you're dedicated to a singular goal or achieving a dream, disconnecting can be viewed as making sacrifices in most cases, showing discipline and dedication. But there is such a thing as a fine balance between dedication and obsessive self-destruction. Or let's say you have depression, and you're just trying to stay alive till the end of the week. Things are ultimately going to slip through the cracks and eventually it's 9 months later, and your social life is non-existent. There seems to be 1,001 ways to lose a connection with someone, changing jobs, arguments, different beliefs and convictions, but there only seems like one way to make a connection with someone, and that's letting yourself love and be loved, or at the very least, liked. What's so hard about reconnecting? We've done it before. When we're born and assumingly are given the basics of a family, and then later friends on our own account. The family isn't immune, however, either. Life happens, and grandchildren move away, creating a distance that doesn't help you see them as much as you'd hope to. This can be applied to parents, siblings, and the like. It's the ones we let be in our lives the closest that can hurt us the most, even if indirectly. The random guy you see every day while getting your coffee is much easier to avoid than, let's say, your mom. To understand how we connect in the first place, we have to look at the brain. There are 4 parts of the brain responsible for how we interact with friends, families, or even just acquaintances. The 4 parts of the brain responsible for this are the ventral striatum, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. So all you have to do is master conscious control of these 4 parts of your brain, and you'll never be lonely again. Despite how modern day has seemingly changed us, we're pack animals. We like being around each other and always have. Grouping up, despite the challenges that may follow, is sort of our whole thing. So is the perceived threat of going without and limited supply that leads to tribalism, but still, we're pack animals. In order to make this happen, there has to be some kind of positive biological feedback for the connections we're making. This is why you feel good when you're spending time with friends and family, and there's a reason engaging in activities, overcoming challenges, and sharing common interests feel good. It's the same reason locking yourself away in a room, on the internet, or playing video games all day is linked to poor social skills, and after a while, feels bad. It's a good evolutionary trait to be able to easily connect, and some of the ways we can build healthy, long-lasting connections is getting out there and finding those with similar neural responses. Funny enough, people who perceive events like stimuli the same are more likely to become friends. The phrase, "you're born alone, you die alone," isn't necessarily true. You have to go out of your way to go against the biological programming that says make friends or find a tribe. You're never really alone. You can see this in a quote by Michael Collins, an astronaut who went to the dark side of the moon.
I don't mean to deny a feeling of solitude. It is there, reinforced by the fact that radio contact with the Earth abruptly cuts off at the instant I disappear behind the moon. I am alone now, truly alone, and absolutely isolated from any known life. I'm in. If a count were taken, the score would be 3 billion plus 2 over on the other side of the moon, and 1 plus God knows what's on this side.
Even when you're feeling lonely, you're never really alone. There are people around you. Your family, your friends, the world more generally can still get to you. Speaking on tribes further, you can see the importance of fellow human commodity when examining the case of the Neanderthals. Bodies of these human ancestors have been discovered with wounds that required intensive medical care over a period of time that also occurred prior to their death or did not lead to it. We can determine this from mummified scar tissue present in the bodies we have found, meaning that tribes members would care for another, which isn't an uncommon animal trait, but cats will often leave weaker members of their group behind if an injury is noticed, showing that we do care about our fellow man. It's important to find one's tribe to feel fulfilled in life, however, it's also equally important to recognize the immense challenges we must overcome in order to make this happen. I moved around a lot as a kid, so I'm pretty good about smelling out my own lot. I look well adapted and typical, but if I'm being real with you, I gravitate towards 2 types of people. The new kids like me, just because they haven't conformed to social pressures yet of the new area, and the weird, the outcast of the already standing area. I noticed I never really enjoyed the politics of the mainstream, but would debate about why, if given a proper build, monks would totally body wizards in D&D 5e. Another point relating back to the earlier discussion of war is that the Bosnian survivor translated to the everyday in this case may be someone getting out of a bad relationship. They're not eager to reconnect to a possible negative relationship again, even if it's not romantic. It's funny enough, but if you had a best friend who you are no longer friends with, you may be hesitant to bring a friend into your life to that level and that soon after. Additionally, at times, distance is necessary. Getting space from the overwhelming factors of the real world can do some real good. But like we've also discussed, there's a fine balance to find by each individual. This disconnection from the world can also span from deeper factors like depression or anxiety. People are quick to look for those who are different. It spans from our own insecurities most of the time, but still, the fact remains. This gives those who have disabilities like chromosomal disorders, amputations, really anything that takes on a physical aspect, and even after time, psychological and behavioral disorders, are a real hindrance with making connections. By pretending to not address certain aspects of this person's personality or disabilities, you're being weird. If someone in a wheelchair comes into your place of business and needs to grab an item from an elevated shelf, there's this whole debate that the disabled person has learned to do it themselves, and by helping them, you're demeaning their efforts versus just asking if they need help. Personally, I just ask. What's the worst they're gonna say? No thanks, I got it? They know they're disabled, I know they're disabled, we are both aware of the situation. I am sure this person has like a claw to grab things high up, and if not, you shouldn't assume they can't walk. Most people in wheelchairs are ambulatory, but still, they might appreciate the assistance. Same with anyone who experiences some form of physical challenge like palsy or dwarfism, the rules apply. They've done just fine before you encountered them, I'm sure with their own personal challenges and victories like everyone else. Ask if they need help, connect, shoot the shit. I find most disabled people are pretty quick to break the tension with a joke about their disability. I think I've heard this one multiple times, but old guys in wheelchairs will come up and they're like, my nickname's Hot Rod. See, that one's pretty good, you know, like nothing, like, if he claim, I can't call him Hot Rod, but if he's saying it, I'm not gonna call him that. I'm just like, ha, good joke. Widening the analogy, if you have a loved one who has some kind of chromosomal disorder like Downs or even autism and is on the spectrum, you're aware of how each case is unique and requires a unique approach. And when we really get into it, doesn't everybody? You don't treat everyone the same. They have personal interests, hobbies, dislikes. So why start here? Even for the abled, social norms are a bitch and constantly changing from the day to day. With social media setting a lot of them, participation on the internet almost seems mandatory. Keeping up with the latest celebrity drama, TikTok trends, and your favorite YouTuber's latest controversy is exhausting. So no wonder people are announcing that they're leaving Twitter by posting on Twitter, only to return after a couple of months because they have no idea what anyone's talking about. I went on a cabin trip with the end goal being wild terrain skiing. I was awful at it, but while up there, Stephen Hawking had passed, and for 5 days, I had no way of knowing because of self-service. Only to make it back down to civilization and have my dad check his phone to go, holy moly, Stephen Hawking died. It's hard to reconnect to even activities or people you once found enjoyable after losing touch for a significant time. When disconnected from people, spanning from factors like distance to traversal free time, there's often hesitation from both parties to reconnect. If contact is reestablished with either activity or person, things can seem different. You may not get the same enjoyment you once did. You may find the awkward stages not worth the friendship or interest in hobby. Our brains also haven't evolved alongside the internet, so when it comes to trying to get back out there, it's best to stick to tradition and go out and interact with people rather than people through a computer or phone. One of the things that could be what disconnected you in the first place. With all these obstacles, it's hard to keep up with everything, to be connected with everything. But every once in a while, come up for air. Pull your head out of the sand and see how much connection you can get out of the world. You'll notice things you never even knew were right in front of you. I didn't list everything to be on the lookout for, but it's a part of being a connection master to spot some of the things I mentioned, but also to be cautious for disconnectors that are unique to each situation. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Merch can be found in the link below. Thank you so much for watching. Please comment what you thought, and peace out. Everyone shut up. Stop telling me I'm schizophrenic. I need to film a video. Psh. Hey there, everyone. How's it going? Yeah, based on the thumbnail you probably already saw, I gave my hand at stand-up comedy.
With lampshades. Yeah. I mean, if it's a lamp, why do you want shade?
It was open mic night. I signed up for the 8th slot. Me and my buddy drove 2 hours over to a neighboring West Texas city. We drove 2 hours back. We spent like 5 hours at the show, so we spent a total time of 9 hours. It felt like I worked a full-time shift. But no, it was mostly just fun, good times, a lot of funny people to see. But I figured I'd tell my friend Tanner, link his channel below, that, hey, record me, I could throw this on YouTube, and that way I could watch it back. But yeah, if you're interested in my work, my film work, I really appreciate it. I just figured I'd try this. I got a lot of compliments last night, and I thought it was really fun just to meet everybody, handed out a bunch of business cards. So hopefully when some comedians are in Lubbock, I get to go film for them, just build up their social presence, get them started on, you know, you got to market yourself, you got to build a fan base. That's like #1 rule. But yeah, I just wanted to say I had so much fun. It was a really good time. I met a lot of good people. But yeah, without further ado, here is my open mic stand-up special. Roll film.
Hey everyone, how's it going tonight? Woo! Let me change that for you. Yeah, so first time doing comedy. I'm pretty nervous. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself. Recently just got out of an abusive relationship. I don't really know how to feel about my ex-girlfriend hitting me harder than my dad. What else? Yeah, first time in comedy. Came up here with Lubbock, my best friend. But yeah, I'm not really from West Texas. I'm from Springfield, Missouri. It's kind of like The Simpsons, for sure. Just replace, you know, fun, whimsical adventures with catalytic converter theft and meth, and then run that for 50 years, and that's my city. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, I moved to Texas when I was 7 after my parents got a divorce. Womp womp. It's pretty sad, but whatever. But yeah, it gave me a lot of introspective insight into like all my other friends' relationships. mainly, I knew my parents were together, but I also knew your parents shouldn't be together. I went over to a friend's house one time, one winter. Fire roaring. We sit down with his family to play a game of Monopoly, so not the best choice for a marriage being held together by, you know, glue and bi-monthly sex. But yeah, we all sit down, we're playing. You know, the mom starts to get an upper hand on the dad, and then the cracks in the relationship start to appear as well. Eventually, she starts to get a little cocky. Got him by the balls with his property payments every move. And then, eventually my friend, who decided to open his big fucking mouth, said, "Hey, mom's really good at this game." And then that kind of set off a fuse. The dad stood up, grabbed the board, walked over to the fire that was keeping the entire house warm, didn't throw it, didn't toss it, kind of psycho-killery, just placed it down. And then the mom said, "Wow, can't believe you just did that." And the dad said, "Great game." But yeah, oh my god, this really is stand up. But yeah, dad stood up and then, God, let me check my note. No, so after my dad left, he was kind of allergic to cats. I wanted to get a ferret just to kind of replace that. I don't know how I reasoned that, but my mom saw that people were shoving hamsters up their asses and always had questions about my sexuality to begin with, so we got a cat. That was when I was 7. That cat's still alive. 17 years later, mind you. It plagues me. But she's not gross. She's not like growing tumors and lumps in her eyes or falling out or anything like that. But I did notice something the other day. She grew an extra toe. No bullshit, has a claw and everything. And either I'm the worst dad ever for the last 17 years or she's evolving like a Pokemon. But yeah, at this rate, I think she's gonna become a family heirloom. You know, I got her when I was 7. If I have kids now, I guarantee you I could give it to them when they're 7. But yeah, she's super good. I just hope she doesn't die anytime soon, because then I'll have to come to terms with my parents' divorce 20 years later. But yeah, the weird part about getting a cat following all that was it kind of felt like I became the parent then. And a little bit weird, just, you know, needed a dad. And so I thought maybe, hey, this cat could be my dad. Yeah. You know, it's a funny world we live in. We've got a brother. He's awful. He's younger than me, and I don't really know what he does. He says he's not on like porn sites. I don't believe him. He mentions to make sure that he's not on porn sites, but who really does that? Yeah, I don't think that's my time. You know, I want to call it there.
Holy shit, what did you think? Tell me all your notes. No, I'm just kidding. I fucked up a few jokes. It was very nerve-wracking. The Monopoly joke was supposed to end in, I didn't go to my friend's house anymore. I thought I was going to end up in the evening news under the Monopoly massacre, which I thought would have hit in terms of audience. But yeah, it was pretty good. And then I started riffing and I just like I totally fell apart at the end. And then the guy who like signals you your times, like you're a minute out, like stood up and I was like, I don't want to use the minute. I'm done. I don't want to tell. Like I had so many good openings. I was like, it's my first time doing comedy, you know. Please don't go, aw fuck, here come the knock knock jokes. So I thought it was pretty good. I had a lot of fun. Hopefully you enjoyed this little stint. I'm making more content. I've got this whole video called Are We Falling? It's in the works. It's 30 minutes long. It's taking forever to put together. It's Easter right now. I'll probably work on that quite a bit today if I don't find a friend to distract me. But we'll see. It's gotten quite tough since I live with my other best friends across. They live apartment complex. They live over at the other apartment complex, a walk away. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I don't typically do this, but I did it for you and myself. I gained the power of self-respect. Okay, bye. Peace out. Hello, everyone. How's it going? What have you been up to? Oh, no way. That's so cool. I wish I could have done that too. Talking with my fellow human beings, I noticed that something a few of the beans were saying, and that is verbatim, I don't say sorry. Baffling statement, That's weird, right? That's something, if followed strictly, would present moral dilemmas and ethical misdemeanors every which way. I can't be the only one to notice this, and if you have a problem saying sorry or apologizing, this video is for you. And if that's not you, well, hey, we're gonna have some deeper takes on human morality. We'll be talking about what's right and what's wrong, at least for now. And if you don't end up liking this one, well, hey, I want you to know that I'm sorry. And also, you're wrong. Sit back and relax and enjoy. Picture this. What if you were a cowboy and your horse knocked a lady into the mud? You wouldn't just go, well, the universe deemed this to be, so good luck with that mud and everything. No, you'd get off your horse and you'd help that little lady back up on the wood plank and say, hey, sorry, Buster, my horse over there can be a bit of an asshole. Or maybe you'd shoot her dead. But more on that later. It's weird, because the laws of man, though present, were never as enforced as they are today. You can definitely point to the ancient man as a way to challenge this approach with several valid reasons and pieces of evidence. But let's look at the Code of Hammurabi, shall we? The laws of the sixth king of Babylon, Hammurabi, were written on stone pillars and were placed in several locations throughout the kingdom of Babylon. Scholars have speculated on how the pillars were interpreted, but several theories indicate that they were more of a best practice ordeal, or a suggestion in the event of this situation unfolding. It's this lack of enforcement which gives support to my earlier claim of how laws weren't followed to the degree they are now. How's Hammurabi going to know if the town of Mari isn't following his rules? Well, he wouldn't, at least not fast enough to do anything about it. This statement of laws being suggestions is supported in the epilogue of the Hammurabi text, wishing well to any smaller king or ruler who practiced the outline, and invoking the god's wrath if disobeyed. Keep in mind that so-called wrath of the gods, because religion is a great way to keep humans acting the best they would think they should, or are told by morally superior people. The laws established, much like today's laws, stem from history, religion, and public interest. As we'll soon find out, however, we're actively learning and redefining what it means to be a good society, and half these laws and punishments are exactly what we're trying to avoid today. Just to give further context, let's take a look at some of the laws from the Hammurabi Code way back yonder. Keep in mind, a lot of these are if statements, as mentioned earlier. Starting us out.
If a man accuses another man and charges him with homicide but cannot bring proof against him, his accuser shall be killed. If a man breaks into a house, they shall kill him and hang him in front of that very breach. If an ox gores to death a man while it's passing through the streets, that case has no basis for a claim. If a builder constructs a house for a man but does not make it conform to specifications, so that the wall then buckles, that builder shall make that wall sound using his own silver.
Lots of fun ideas there and a lot to unpack. Clearly, some of this is, well, wrong. Some of the punishments come from what may have felt right, but not necessarily putting actual public interest as priority number one. It seems trials, and what we'll call jail, are noticeably absent from the Hammurabi Code. This is the code that literally started the eye for an eye. No, for real, this is where it comes from.
If a man should blind the eye of another man, they shall blind his eye.
Also, instead of slavery being frowned upon, well, they had this little law to cover that too.
If a slave should declare to his master, "You are not my master," he, the master, shall bring charge and proof against him that he is indeed his slave, and his master shall cut off his ear.
Like, how is that justice or fair? I don't even know if that's good for the public. The slave will lie about being a slave for his own freedom. I guess I have to mark him with a lack of ear for the next guy, so he's got his slave papers in order for when the slave lies again. That law is apparently better in ancient Babylon than, I don't know, not having slaves to begin with. What if I forge documents and cut off a guy's ear and claim him as my lying slave? Sort of jams up the works there. Slavery got shockingly far in the history of the world, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, there were little spurts where those who could have seen the horrors and first-hand accounts of slavery rose to power to temporarily abolish the practice. A Chinese emperor did ban slavery for like 3 years only after a decade from when Christ died, so it's not like we were all walking around oblivious of the moral standing on owning people. Speaking of Christ, a few popes banned other people keeping Christians as slaves, but not the other way around, which is a big-ish deal. This decision was brought on from the Crusades, where Muslims also had a rule that slaves were A-OK as long as they weren't fellow Muslims. Almost as if they knew slavery was bad, but stuck with dehumanizing others as a means to benefit from forced labor. Slavery is still around to this day in forms of sex slaves and, the modern prison system using labor like that, in staggering numbers, so it's still something we're holding on to as not great, but not completely unacceptable either.
Speaking on religion a bit more, Christianity was such a catch because people were poor and could expect the help of others without the common obstacles presented in paganism, like the tendencies to focus on social class and wealth. Christianity was inclusive to the poor who tended to revolt and eliminated several religious figureheads for just one, appealing to leadership, or in other words, kings and emperors. Prior to Christianity, Zoroastrianism was rockin' and rollin'. If you aren't familiar with this flavor of religion, then the big points are be good, create, and that your body and soul are separated from your higher soul during your time on Earth. When you die, after 4 days, your body soul convenes with your higher soul, and that higher soul uses the experiences and information to fight evil in the spirit realm. The idea and introduction of such concepts as the soul got everyone home to the idea that your consciousness goes on even after you die. It's speculated that even proto-humans had early grasp on what was waiting for us, as the idea of the underworld is not a new one, but the idea of eternal punishment is where things get interesting. There is a hell, so to speak, in Zoroastrianism, but it's reformative, giving a chance for souls to leave, eventually, and join the good fight against evil. Zoroastrianism has more in common with Christianity than one might think, as similar themes of a messiah and resurrection are written on in both. However, the two biggest religions in the world, Islam and Christianity, have one major shared trait: turn or burn. You're gonna be good or you're going to this super terrible place called hell.
Well, what's there?
You know how, your hand hurts when you burn it?
Yeah.
Well, that, forever, and all over. And plus, there's also a little red guy who pokes you in the ass with a fork. And if you think that's not bad, there's other stuff, worse than you can think of.
Oh wow, that's worse than I can think of.
Hell was, and still is, a good recruitment strategy for sure. There weren't as strict consequences, if any, for not believing in other religions, but there definitely were once them Abrahamic showed up. Mostly, the two biggest. Islam talks about how only Muslims can escape hell, so even when eternal punishment is a factor, you can join us and you might escape one day, but turn away and be there forever. To expand, Jewish people have a more complex view of the afterlife with a notable absence of hell, but you better believe sinners get punished in the living world. There needs to be serious consequences for not following the desired rules. Christians and Muslims found the perfect caveat, as their main rule is believe in my God or get fucked. Diving back into the ancient law of the Babylonians, people, and more importantly, the law, is wild in nature. One set example of this little attempt at just behavior from the human race is shown in the Hammurabi excerpts. If an ox kills some villager, then it's okay. But if a house collapses and kills someone, the builder of the house is to be killed in return. Seems today that animals that kill people are put down, and shitty house builders have insurance for that sort of thing. Your life isn't forfeit in the event of a crime or accident like it once was. Basically, people were a lot less noble back then, and it was eternal damnation that got us back on the same page. This topic of romanticizing history came up on a thread I was browsing which discussed the less than savory natures of knights and samurai, but, more importantly, the coat of arms and lack thereof. Knights did have a documented code, but as one user states, priests and holy men would have to unbury body parts of saints to remind them of their oath, and to maybe chill out a little on how they were treating civilians. We've heavily romanticized these people who are essentially mercenaries with a bit more allegiance to a completely new status of hero and champion. I will say, however, it's shown again religion is a great tool for keeping folks in line. No one wants to be sent to hell, and it's ingrained in us whether you are religious or not that something waits for us in the afterlife, and what that something is determined by your actions here on Earth. I'm sure some slave-owning carpenter in the Bible believed himself a good person because they followed the rules and cultural practices of his people. However, if you asked anyone today if slave owners go to heaven or the paradise in the afterlife, the majority of people would say no, they do not. If I had to guess, people in thousands of years are most likely going to be appalled on some level with things that we've known are already morally questionable on an individual level, like how we hunt whales and oil. There is a reason the age-long question of if humans are naturally evil creatures, or is it our environment that makes us such, has been asked for hundreds of years now. I've always thought of it like this: well, what's our environment? Other people. So the real question is, are humans bad or good? I even did a little video already sort of discussing this topic. Most modern people are acting on a level of morality that surpasses a lot of figures we would consider paragons, like popes and kings in eons past. There was a whole generation of French and American philosophers who debated on the natural state of man, with divisive opinions and evidence to support each claim, in what would be a debate with no clear answer. There's reasons this question even came up in the first place, that reason being humans were on a real mean streak there for a minute. To prove this further, let's take a look at a few things. Have you ever been on a walk in nature, exploring a trail or heavily rural area? You walk down the right-hand side of the path if you're normal, making your way along, enjoying trees and the like. As you're doing so, another individual comes around the horizon, on the left-hand side. Well, your left, their right. As you walk closer together, headed opposite directions, I'm sure you feel a sense of something, a possible nervousness regarding this person's intentions. The possibilities of this person are limited, but also somehow limitless with a little imagination. More than likely, you'll give them a curled upper lip white guy / Polish hello, or maybe not even acknowledge that person at all. But with a little imagination, or in other words, paranoia, spanning from, I don't know, evolution, a proper level of caution, you begin to snowball. I read way too many murder mysteries and too much true crime to not at least think to myself, something's up. This 70-year-old man on his morning walk could do me harm. He may have done harm to the last person met under such circumstances. Is there a dead body just over this hill? Who knows? Should I strike first just to be sure? Most likely not. Because then you're the freak attacking people, and you've become the type of person you originally feared. I think the new Fallout television series does a great job of showing the dilemma here when morality is removed from the wider world or no longer outweighs the possible negatives of acting on instinct alone. If you haven't seen the show, to give context, the setting takes place 200 years after the dropping of the atomic bombs. We are in what is deemed the post-apocalypse stage. It has fantasy elements, so there are zombies or ghouls and super mutants, big green ubermen that desire to hurt baseline humans and take over the world. In this world, there are those who were sheltered away from the writhing remains of humanity for the last 200 years inside vaults, commercially sold community bomb shelters. These people in said vaults are what we'll call on the same or near moral level of people you would find in real life, with maybe a touch of Latter-day Saints. On one of these vault dwellers' journey to the surface, we see an example of how morality doesn't benefit us in any context within the realm of survival, at least in this example. The vault dweller on her journey is joined by a member of the Brotherhood of Steel, a militant faction. Typically, the Brotherhood can range from a policing force / Red Cross to a technocratic fiefdom, where they're sort of racist, but it's not even like race, it's, I guess, maybe xenophobic, I should say. The two on their travels come to a bridge where they encounter two other wastelanders. The well-versed member of the Brotherhood of Steel begins to assess how he will eliminate these two fellow travelers, deeming them a threat, and asking the dweller for her firearm. The vault dweller refuses and wishes to deal with this conflict cordially and with morality. Dialogue is exchanged, and seemingly an understanding reached. However, when the groups intersect on the bridge, a close-quarters gunfight unfolds in less than 2 seconds, leaving the two opposing travelers dead. It's revealed by the Brotherhood of Steel member upon further investigation that these people are fiends, or in other words, cannibals of the Fallout universe. Ultimately, the Brotherhood saved the highest moral power through amoral means. It gets more complicated too. If you're familiar with the series, the Brotherhood of Steel character is in a negative moral standing when examining him from our world, but his actions have propelled him forward into a new status, being more valued by those he wants to impress, and subsequently raising his survival chances through acquisition of materials, even if duplicitous. It presents an understanding that he's doing things the best he can, being the best person he can within his own moral code for the appropriate environment. In a world where survival is everything, he who is willing to do anything to survive is king. If you think to yourself, well, what kind of life is that? To be fully dedicated to this savagery? Well, this question is also presented in Fallout in a different situation. A character from the pre-war era, now turned ghoul 200 years later, is a real bastard. When he and the Vault Dweller cross paths, she asks why he keeps going. His answer? He's crazy. But not everyone else is. The ghoul knows his actions aren't what he was brought up to understand as morally upright. In the show, we even see him, pre-war, acting as a generally good person. Similar to ancient human life with the Babylonians, the Brotherhood of Steel member knows only this world as his own. There isn't some other moral code out there that differs greatly from kill thieves and stay alive. This is it. The ideas we've spent millennia honing to this day were wiped clean, and now we're starting near our primal roots once again. Fallout isn't the only form of fiction to demonstrate the historical accuracy of humans' recent evolution to the law of morality as just that. Recent. Not to mention the ever-changing nature of what is an upstanding moral person. I mean, we're going from common problems being mass rape and murder to now wealth inequality. This isn't to play down that certain heinous actions are still present, but we do have a way of apprehending these people and delivering our perceived form of justice upon them as a collective. Blood Meridian was the talk of the town pretty recently, as in the last 2 years. Talk of the town meaning that TikTok got to it along with I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Lucky for us, this book's entire focus is on the apparent barbaric nature of humans when faced with personal gain and survival. Blood Meridian, written by Cormac McCarthy in 1985, tells of an epic set in the Old West of the United States and parts of Mexico. The story follows the actions of the Glanton Gang, a group of outlaws contracted by Mexican governments to obtain human scalps belonging to native Mexican Americans in exchange for money.
Our primary protagonist, simply referred to as the Kid, is often said to be a terrible person by fellow debaters of the novel, but with a lack of standard morality, I would say he is a true neutral force of the time and circumstance. Does he do bad things? Yes, but he's acting on actions based on the surrounding world. The Kid's actions when up to today's moral codes are often frowned upon by the leaders or head figures that have taken the time to adopt this boy, stating certain actions of benevolence are going to get him killed and the gang members will be short a fellow gunslinger. Most notably, when a member of the Glanton gang catches an arrow to the leg, he asks the surrounding members for help removing it, but the only person to volunteer is the Kid. When he finishes the action of breaking the arrow and pulling it through, the members comment on the poor judgment of the boy. The reason being that these are killers, and if the Kid had ruptured an artery or any other lethal mistake, the man would have shot the boy in the head or killed him by any other means as a way to not die alone, or have one last kill before he goes. It's here another example where moral behavior can get you killed. We often praise those willing to give their life to save another, but is this really that different from trying to save a drowning person than being killed yourself by said drowning person? Well, yeah, one person is drowning and the other is just a murderer, and in the end, you're still dead. However, there is a little bit of a subjective nature here. Oftentimes, a drowning person has made the choice to enter the water with the possibility of drowning being present. If you're not trained in saving drowners or people shot with arrows, is it only then one's not held responsible for that person's death? The book depicts murder, assault on several degrees, and a litany of other crimes as just everyday occurrences to those in the wrong place at the wrong time. It adds another layer of complexity when considering some of the actions are government sanctioned. A lot of our societal laws are instilled and enforced by government. The social contract between our desires as governed people are shown in a set of laws that will result in consequences if not followed. These laws are a mirror of what we as individuals are willing to admit to other individuals. You've had your sister killed? I've had my brother killed. It's different, but it's made us feel deep remorse, and therefore murder should be, and is, illegal. Also, whose ox hasn't killed someone in the streets? Cut him a break. Moreover, it sucks when your personal property gets stolen or damaged, hence why it's illegal to steal and damage property. But what happens when that person responsible is never punished, or they just keep stealing and destroying your stuff? One might call it an overreach, but in the majority of human history, thieves were killed or mutilated. The killing of a person for stealing one's property is one of those dividing factors, as it could be considered murder in one place and a lawful act in another. Most people bring up the argument about how we put more value in our stuff than other people's lives, but if you make a than statement, you've already prepared the argument for the other side. What you also inadvertently said was, why does this thief put more value in my stuff than their own life? I live in America, people use guns here, I've been known to exercise my American right, but let me just say this. I like guns, they're cool and definitely add a level of spice to America's world image, but I could do without them. All our problems with shootings and gun violence here in America are a gun control issue. Other countries don't have guns, and their public areas aren't being shot up. Shut up about London knife attacks, cause look at knife violence for all of England, now look at America. Proportionately, we're shooting and stabbing each other more. Guns are a privilege as much as driving. If you're a felon, well, no gun. If you're driving drunk, then no car. See those reasonable if statements? Got that little format from Babylon. Your rights are whatever you can take by force or intelligence and nothing else. You have a right to be a breathing body born into whatever life you get. Bearing arms, speech, press, these supposedly unalienable rights have been alienated and they will be again. You can only have certain types of weapons and you can't say fuck Jesus in church. Freedom of speech isn't real. You're probably telling yourself, well, that's other people's rights to freedom of religion. Yeah, religion, not violence, and more than likely you're not going to be in that church much longer. The press has been controlled by the government in the past. Observe this excerpt on the law relating to that.
News organizations are protected from the government censorship, except in the most serious national security situations they cannot be stopped from publishing, prior restraint.
There's always going to be exceptions snuck into every facets of law. Nobody has a right to anything in the world. Nothing's guaranteed except death and taxes. But back to stealing. Who's to say this car, this item, this whatever it may be you're having stolen from you, or maybe even stealing, isn't the only thing stopping your family from starving to death? Most likely it won't be, but in developing nations, there's a reason theft is met with such high degrees of punishment. Another situation presented could be that you're eating in a restaurant with your family. A man walks in and points a gun at the person working the register, demanding all the money. The man is given the money and he begins to walk to the car in the parking lot. While walking to his car, a person gets out of their vehicle and shoots the man dead. Some would call this murder. I call it an occupational hazard of robbing people. On a legislative level, you could do a little policing, asking the man to please drop the money and wait for authorities, but he has a gun for a reason, and so do you, so, On a moral level, the man/robber is exiting the situation in what is considered to be de-escalating by most. However, if someone is willing to rob a building with innocent people in it for money, then he's a threat, and just because he's leaving doesn't end the dangerous possibilities he possesses. Imagine this. A hospital gets a call from the other line. Someone is telling them to put all the morphine in a bag and meet them outside, or they'll set off a bomb in the hospital. The staff do as instructed. Someone takes the bag and begins to walk away. They click a button. The bomb is seemingly no longer active. He's still in the parking lot, so should you let him go and allow proper authorities to deal with it? I mean, they're not a threat anymore. They're clearly de-escalating. We'll talk more on this, but the fact that we're not killing people for stealing horses, I mean cars, is a big leap in the tolerance humanity has built up to crime. We want to be the good guys. We want to believe in second chances. We want to appease our gods, and if we don't believe in God, then what's nobler than being a good person for no reason? But it relates back to how we all have an understanding that humans are sentient and that killing is an inherently evil action in most cases. More relatable is this little analogy. I'm sure when you were a kid, you would smash bugs or do something along those lines. I advocate for non-violence, but at one point I was about to smash, let's call it a spider, and my dad instilled some empathy in me. He said, you know that spider's parents are going to be looking for him. Do you really want to be the reason they never see him again? Just giving some perspective on the whole thing really became a core memory for me. Of course, spiders don't visit their parents to my knowledge, but overall there's a reason the spider exists. It provides a pivotal unseen role, and I'd have to think myself a tiny god to rob the world of that. Will the spider not sing along with all of creation in God's choir? If you're thinking to yourself, so a spider deserves more empathy than a human, well, no, it's complicated. This spider will only act as a spider, its limits are known, and its actions and desires are fairly understood. Humans are such vast creatures, it could be the second chance given to the person stealing your car that acts as the catalyst to their renaissance in life. If you kill them there, they'll simply be known as a car thief, and you a possible murderer. On the other hand, that person is stooped to such behavior, so maybe that's all they are, a thief. Sophisticated society says we have to give people a few chances before we call them an absolute anything, but back to Blood Meridian. There are several themes involving a large portion of the cast in Blood Meridian that could take up their own entire videos for discussion. However, if you're familiar with the book, we really only need to focus on one other character besides the kid, the character of Judge Holden, who is said to be a representation of evil or devil incarnate. Holden has a series of bizarre characteristics and embodies several otherworldly traits that would lead readers to speculate he's the devil, Satan, or the serpent in the Garden of Eden itself. To note, the judge is referred to in physical description as roughly 6'8", or more generally super tall, and not skinny guy tall either, he's ripped. Completely hairless and stark white. He's said to never sleep and only eat for the enjoyment of such an act. Other factors such as the judge's actions also depict a connection with his satanic roots. To give some context, the judge once said this quote,
"Whatever exists," he said, "whatever in creation exists without my knowledge, exists without my consent."
In a world where men are a commodity, this line shows an exert of control that either a fool or an immortal would state so haphazardly, and the judge is no fool. The judge is able to commit almost supernatural levels of atrocity, crushing mules' heads with a single blow of a rock, abducting several children for his own personal use, and contributing largely to the gang's paid genocide of native peoples, only then to destroy the gang when genocide is taken off the table. He's not a good guy by any means, and the sentience of his own nature makes it especially heinous. He does these actions because he believes it is a right to do so, given to him by the simple want of said goals and the ability to take it without being stopped through force or lack of other self-actualization. More so on this, it's a sickening blend of modern world sophistication and the primal brutality of the judge's wants that make him so dangerous. He wants sex, entertainment, to watch men indulge in hedonism. He knows that a part of getting what he desires without being stopped means showing guile, having the cunning to lie for his own advantage at times or simply his own amusement for others. Like any McCarthy book, the character of the judge can be explored indefinitely, but one notable quote from Judge Holden pertains to this video's topic above all others. And that quote is,
"Moral law is an invention of mankind for the disenfranchisement of the powerful in favor of the weak. Historical law subverts it at every turn. A moral view can never be proven right or wrong in any ultimate test."
And he's not entirely wrong when referring to how moral law can never be proven right or wrong by any ultimate test. However, neither can his Darwinist belief that the strong will inherit the earth, or namely those who have abandoned moral tendencies in lieu of pure pleasure and survival. Relating back to the judge's own beliefs, if an even bigger guy comes by and bashes his bald head in with a big rock because he's an ultra good guy and hates the evil shit Holden's been up to, would that not justify both laws of man, primal and moral? Moral law was a driving factor in this scenario where Holden was killed, but his death is facilitated by an overwhelming force of might from the stronger good guy. One could argue that morality has no effect in this situation, the results are all the same. If the man had a similar mindset to Holden, he simply would kill him regardless of Holden's actions, but by the man's own desire to show might. Morality also complicates things. Life, as in case you haven't noticed, has become sacred, and the act of killing throws most people in a tizzy as it should. Holden is never brought down.
He ends up consuming the kid in so many words, in an act so atrocious we never find out what really happened. Some speculate the kid, the neutral, is thrown aside and violated by the evil or Holden. Others speculate the kid becomes the next iteration of the ideology, engaging in some of the judge's acts. Some say killing is never okay, others say it's okay in the act of self-defense, but who are we to decide? One says stealing is bad unless it's for food, but then what's the limit? Toothbrushes because dental hygiene is important, but then laundry detergent because it's also important for staying clean. What's the right answer? Animals kill for sport. We are animals, so it's okay then, right? Well, no, not at all. My personal opinion, animals are the pure neutral of our world. Your dog is a good boy, don't get me wrong, but your dog, or any other dog for that fact, isn't good. And they're not bad either. It's a dog. They simply do what dogs do. If a dog eats a rabbit and a dog eats a plate of food off the counter, both dogs feel exactly the same about their moral state. They're eating. If two kangaroos are fighting for the same mate versus two bears fighting for territory, all involved are having the same exact thought. Nothing. This is a part of life, and sometimes you have to duke it out or have a shittier life than you would have. Could they share mates and territory? Well, probably, but think to yourself, would you want to? Animals are acting out of instinct and understanding. The aspects of right and wrong, mine and others, are out of the reality of their possible lifetime of thoughts. You see, we're not too far separated from the bears, kangaroos, and dogs of the world, but we've evolved just enough to know a couple of things that do a little something something to us in conjunction with other information. Like let's say you start sharing a wife, or sharing a house with another family. You have to do some serious mental restructuring to make that make sense. Moving on, it's all of this and the fact that I don't get murdered or murder people on walks more times than not that indicate maybe we are acting on a higher level than animals. With that said, a large group of people will tell you why evil playthroughs in video games are often reserved for their second time, and that's because, in short, it feels good to be good. You want to be embraced by your peers as a people's champion because in even shorter terms, the ostracized monkey dies alone. To elaborate, most people's ideal death, as morbid as it may sound, is as painless, as old, and as surrounded by as many loved ones as possible. There's a lot of reasons we as a species are pack animals who form communities: protection, connection, and innovation. To have a truly thriving community, we have to respect the foundation of why we've all teamed up to begin with, to further our personal goals. And unfortunately, sometimes that does come at the cost of others, but the point remains we have to get along together to make this happen. And this is where we come to sorry. I'm sorry. I am sorry. As mentioned earlier, it's not easy to say sorry, to apologize for something no matter how big or small. It's what some might imagine as taking a weakness and showing it to the world, saying, yes, this is where you can hurt me to make me feel remorse for something I did or do. In reality, it's a little more complicated than that. Or should I say, sorry is such an easy premise, but we make it complicated. There's being sorry, feeling sorry for someone, and more notably, there are those who say it all the time and those who refuse to say it at all. So clearly some people are holding words to a higher value than others, which complicates our scenario. Typically, a I'm sorry is referred to as an apology, but when does an apology no longer suffice to offset one's actions? Well, dropping an atomic bomb apparently is a little out of the realm of a simple I'm sorry, so let's talk about that. The USA has single-handedly portrayed the act of dropping the only atomic bombs in history as a necessary act and, more importantly, a moral sacrifice we as a nation were willing to bear for the rest of the world. That's a little spotty. At the time, America and more generally the Allies were engaged in this little military practice called island hopping. Japan, during World War II, was rocking and rolling like Zoroastrianism and seized as far as New Guinea, yeah, the one near Australia. To give context, Japanese people, or should I say the Japanese Empire, were, let's call it, insane back then. We pretty much sum up Imperial Japan and modern Japan as two separate places entirely. Some notable aspects of Imperial Japan were they like to kill themselves a lot. Have you ever heard of Gyokusai? It means to shatter like a jewel, or shattering like a jewel, but another meaning of the word is along the lines of a noble suicide. Gyokusai can be seen as present through the more commonly known kamikaze plane maneuvers, which turns the plane into a weapon, and the bonsai charge, where a line of soldiers would run into the line of battle without the expectation one would survive, as a commonly held code of honor was no surrender. America would come in and systematically take control of these islands from the Japanese. It was costly and resulted in a large loss of life. That is a fact. However, the argument that the bombing stopped an even larger loss of life is speculative in my little humble opinion. You're taking a lot of guesstimate there. The most substantial loss of the US life occurred at the Battle of Normandy, where roughly 27,000 young men gave their lives in the name of freedom. The grand loss of life experienced by the US sums up at 407,000. To give some context, America dropped a bomb on Hiroshima and then a week later dropped one on Nagasaki. To be honest, the Japanese most likely thought that the US probably didn't have two of these things. Thank God they didn't go for another because we had three.
To bring it full circle, the war of the minds and hearts of the people were tactics not quite discovered by the US, or at least they were being used in another way through wartime propaganda posters. Yes, Hitler is bad, but the US only goes for the whole nationalism thing when war breaks out, or are about to spread pamphlets rather than supplies. However, after the war, the US had to spin this atomic bombing thing in a new light. Sure, we were the strongest country in the world, we knew how to unleash the fucking sun right here on our little patch of land. But if the US figured it out, so would everyone else. It was just a matter of time. We needed to look like the good guys, champions of Earth. So what do? We begin to tell a little story. A story of a small island nation who excels at military tactics and naval warfare. Well, by God, they're some of the best fighters we've ever seen. They're short, but boy are they vicious, almost like an entirely different species of humans. But above all else, they're loyal. Loyal to their country, to their rules, to their honor. Their honor is so profound and runs so deep that irregular effects of war have no intimidation. There is no end until every Japanese has fallen. With the death tolls for the Japanese being around 1 to 2 million soldiers, the world was ready to buy the story. The end goal of the US was to end the war quickly with minimizing the death toll. Honestly, it's a moral dilemma if we go back to the law of morality to begin with. People are going to die regardless, and if we relate to what the psychotic Judge Holden says, the way we go about it doesn't matter. There will be dead people regardless. In reality, did all Japanese people want to die for the Empire? Most likely not. And could the US have dropped the bomb somewhere in rural Japan to get their point across? Most likely. War crimes are an oxymoron. War itself is a crime. More civilians died in the war than soldiers, and sadly that's not an uncommon trend either. Your life is up for grabs if a war breaks out, and you live near anything remotely helping the military, even factories. Also, that phenomenon known as perceptions is quite the thing these days. Japan is said to have declared war on the US because they wanted to expand the empire and that the US had cut off Japan's oil supply. In today's terminology, it's called an oil war, but if we take a look at the list of offenders, we'll find our favorite team present more than once. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were selected for their economic power and military hub statuses. Notably, Germany was not selected because we bombed the shit out of Japan, and we thought that Germany was intact enough to learn quite a bit from the bomb had it not gone off. Also, Hitler had been killed by some Ruskies 3 months earlier, so we saw that little movement quieting down for the time being. But now we have laws. The IHL bans indiscriminate methods of warfare such as area bombardment, which involves dropping large imprecise bombs over populated urban areas through airstrikes and ground shelling. Any attack that is not launched at a specific military objective, or which involves a method of means of warfare that cannot be conducted with precision, is considered an indiscriminate attack and therefore a war crime. These rules we set on countries are oftentimes minuscule. It's like we all sat down after tearing each other's guts out and went, hey, that was pretty bad. Let's never fight like that again, and if we do, no hair pulling and eye gouging next time. And everyone goes, yeah, I hate when my eyes get gouged. That's a good idea. The next thing you know, we forget where borders are, and the Czech Republic is ready to hair pull some German borders as a change for once. All of this is relevant to our conversation if we break it down like this. America is operating on a moral law rather than the law of primal power. Despite our shortcomings, we do try to act on these laws of war everyone else seems to forget about. Both countries have never issued an apology because both countries don't feel remorse, but through our actions have shown the groundwork is being laid for a brighter future. The US relations with Japan following the war was a complicated issue, but what's much less a complicated issue is our relationship with a slew of other groups we've been in contact with. The US back in the 1900s, earlier than World War II and I, when we were a more traditional empire, believed in strong annexation, scooping up resources from lesser developed countries, turning around and selling that shit. We eventually locked eyes with the Philippines and said, you're next. We were feeling pretty hot coming off our Hawaii high, so going for another tropical paradise already occupied was something we weren't new to. To cut it short, America was given colonizer dibs on the Philippines after defeating Spain, and then the Philippines, doing their own thing, declared war with America. After America won, because we didn't really start losing until the 60s, America would begin the occupation of the Philippines. We started concentration camps and declared the Filipino people too low level for self-governance. 200,000 civilians would perish due to famine and disease. And, you see, I've brought this example up to demonstrate that moral law truly is a modern invention. The US hasn't apologized for this, mainly because I just think they hope people forget. And sure, there were advocates for these territories, but on a larger majority, most white Americans said that this is the norm, and if anything, we're doing good stuff because it helps me out and it helps the people I see every day out, and I don't really see Filipinos every day. That's why the Japanese didn't have a deep-seated hatred of America following the war. It's because in East Asian culture, a nation following the loss of a war could expect to be occupied, extorted, and in some cases, complete cultural annihilation.
But the US just came in saying, hey, here's what's going to happen. This whole war thing, you're done. You're not allowed to play anymore. You just get too excited. Secondly, you gotta stay on the island. Not a island, but the island. Third, we saw that shit in China, so you may get a letter in the mail for a court appearance in Tokyo in a little while. It's this newfound morality that we see now has become commonplace. The US follows, or at least tries to follow, the established laws of war. The US never apologized to Japan, and Japan never apologized to the US, because it would be a senseless gesture, as the actions clearly state we both believe the other to be a threat. Sure, we slip, but in a world of pure barbarism where the only thing holding us back from utter savagery is the imaginary rules we have set in place on something as expansive as war, it shows we as a species want to be better. We don't want to kill each other in such excessive ways. We want to rise above the monstrous tendencies we all have inside of us. That's where I'm sorry ties this all together. I'm sorry, or an apology, shows that we're willing to compromise, to show remorse, to express a higher level of understanding. I'm sorry shows you're willing to work through issues without violence or shows of strength. That you are in fact a being or entity with faults of your own, but are aware of those faults and would like to express that there is a solution for both of us here. Showing remorse can be more than just taking account for our actions, but to situations that happen to others. Remorse can also be seen as sympathy. An allowance to sympathize with those doesn't make you weaker, it makes you simply the active sympathetic. We've come to understand strong and weaker as adjectives made up of other emotions. Feeling sympathy and remorse doesn't make you weaker in the same way showing ignorance and exercising one's pride doesn't make you stronger. That's the complex nature of being nice for no reason. We talked about it briefly, but revisiting it feels good to be good. We have this little thing called empathy in us. We try to relate to the feelings of others because without it, we wouldn't realize that others feel happy and sad just like me. And then you're the monkey dying alone. Saying I'm sorry or apologizing doesn't make you weak or strong. It shows the world in one way or another that I'm ready to move forward from senseless conflict and violence, that I can relate to your situation and hopefully you can relate to mine. And that though we both could invoke violence and physical will over another to justify a point, we'd like to settle these things like the sentient beings we are. So what do we say? I'm sorry. If you enjoyed this video, I have merch and some kind of YouTube monetization thing set up, but who knows how it works. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and if you didn't, well hey, I'm sorry, and I sort of mean that. Peace out! Isaac Asimov, one of the most influential science fiction writers of the last century, only seems to grow in relevance as time goes on. His work ages like a fine wine with each Elon Musk Neuralink update. Asimov is considered one in a trio of the big three science fiction writers. Yeah, they were doing that before anime, big news, along with Robert Heinlein and Arthur Clarke. From developing the first conceptions of modern-day robotics and literature, and raising the genre to the monolith science fiction is now, I think a little accreditation is due, especially from a superfan like myself. Let me clarify, I'm a super fan of science fiction, not directly Asimov. He was a bit problematic for my taste, but recognize the importance of his contributions. In this little piece I've thrown together for you all, I shall give a pretty brief history of his life and then mostly focus on his original works, giving brief plot synopsises and then their impact in today's media. This video is sponsored by me. I don't have a Patreon, but I've updated the website with new merch and a new look, so just checking it out would mean a lot to me. I've linked the website down below. But enough about me. Isaac Asimov was born on an indeterminate date, which will continue to become a reappearing theme throughout his life. His varying records indicate a birth did occur sometime in early October 1919 and January 1920. Isaac Asimov would be born to two Orthodox Jewish parents, Anna and Judah Asimov. However, he once said his father was never one to pass down the prayers that come with Judaism. Ah man, why did I say that so weird? Judaism? Later, Asimov would become an atheist himself, as is the running stereotype with men of science. It would be at the age of 3, in the year 1922, that the family would immigrate to the States, and more specifically, New York. Hey, I'm walking here.
In the States, in New York, Isaac would naturalize, learning to read English and going on to teach his siblings the same. At this point in his life, a young Asimov was attending Brooklyn public schools and working at the family business. The Asimov family would operate a series of candy shops where the entire family would be expected to work. It's here that Asimov first found his love for the written word, as he's described. The candy shop his parents owned just so happened to sell newspapers and magazines, something the young Asimov would indulge himself in while, working, as we all do. What a slacker. Picking up the occasional pulp magazine, throwing the young boy into worlds unknown. Asimov would grow up and graduate high school at the age of 15, okay? From here, he would apply at the branch of the University of Columbia in Brooklyn, there's no way. Eventually accepted on a probationary status. There, Asimov would initially study zoology as a major, but quickly switched to chemistry after a rather unpleasant dissection experience with an alley cat. Take notes, Schrodinger. Asimov is no bachelor bitch like your boy here and mustered up the strength to go back to get his doctorate in philosophy, in chemistry, which apparently is something you can do. Philosophy and chemistry. Well, no, let's break that down. A doctorate in philosophy and chemistry. That's what Asimov has. That's what Isaac Asimov degree has. Yes. Post-graduation, Asimov would work as a civilian chemist for the Navy before being drafted into the Army, which is like the worst headhunting deal I've ever heard, in 1945. In the Army, Asimov's birth date would be called into question as he was listed as being 27, too old for the draft, and was released from the service with an honorable discharge. The task force Asimov once found himself a part of went off just days after Asimov's discharge to perform the famous nuclear weapons test at Bikini Atoll, which I think if he had a problem with killing a cat, he might have a problem with killing a bunch of Japanese. Following this little mix-up with the draft, Asimov would be offered a teaching position as associate professor of biochemistry at Boston University, due to a relationship with the previous professor William Boyd, who was stepping down from the role. Asimov had been writing prior to this position, with his short story Nightfall even having helped him get the teaching job to begin with. But it would be a bit after obtaining such a prestigious position that Asimov noticed his writing was more financially rewarding. He'd begun to do so full-time, even neglecting some of his teaching obligations to continue writing. A few key points in Asimov's life were that he was married twice, once to a woman by the name of Gertrude Blugerman, B-Man, from the years 1942 to 1973, and then shortly after the divorce was finalized, I'm talking like 2 weeks short, he remarried his second wife and final wife, Janet Asimov, who would only recently pass in 2019. R.I.P. During his lifetime, Asimov would do a lot besides the obvious. He arguably popularized science fiction conventions, so, Comic-Con's got a lot to owe to him. That the Asimov estate. Got caught up in a series of scandals where his reputation took a bit of a sour turn. When it came out, he was known as a serial groper. Primarily, he got a little handsy at these science fiction conventions around female attendees. In his mid-50s, Asimov would experience a heart attack, and by his mid-60s, he would require a coronary bypass operation, which led to a blood transfusion. This blood transfusion, conducted in 1983, would transmit HIV to Asimov. Despite this video not really being a direct coverage on the AIDS crisis in America in the 80s, we're going to talk about it anyways. HIV is a virus. Viruses are alive. Debate me in the comments if you disagree. Essentially, viruses have evolved alongside cell-based life, even speculated to have started first, acting as a symbiote to our own origins. It's theorized this relationship turned sour and viruses lost the ability to reproduce organically, or never had it to begin with, thus requiring a source of protein externally. Viruses use our cells' protein-making ability to instead create more virus microbes. Viruses live and die at a much faster rate than humans and reproduce and evolve at the same accelerated pace. There are thousands of viruses and some infect very specific cell types like HIV and its relationship with primate white blood cells, or polio and mature nerve cells, to name another. HIV damages the immune system and interferes with the body's ability to fight infection and disease. HIV can spread through contact with infected blood, semen, or vaginal fluids. There's no cure to HIV/AIDS, but medications can control infections and prevent disease progression. A person with HIV is considered to have progressed to AIDS when their number of CD4 cells fall below 200 cells per cubic millimeter of blood. If someone raises their CD4 back to HIV levels, in other words above 200, that person is still considered to have an upholding AIDS diagnosis. Viruses use T cells, which are normally responsible for fighting said viruses. This embeds HIV in other areas of the body, making it hard to find, metaphorically speaking.
As the virus multiplies and destroys immune cells, symptoms can develop such as fever, fatigue, and swollen lymph nodes. Untreated HIV typically turns into AIDS in about 8 to 10 years. People who develop AIDS without taking any kind of HIV treatment typically live about 3 years post-AIDS diagnosis. Upon the death of Isaac Asimov at the age of 72 due to AIDS-related complications, his daughter Robin and his wife would release to the public that it was initially heart failure, which took the behemoth of an author. Years later, in an effort to destigmatize the disease as something that was strictly passed around homosexual communities, even being referred to as the gay disease or virus at the time, Robin and Janet would go on to enlighten the public as the reality of the situation surrounding Asimov's death. I think at this point it would be appropriate to look into some of his writings, starting with The End of Eternity. Written in 1955, The End of Eternity is set in the far future of humanity, and time travel has been invented for quote-unquote trade between times in order to help humanity prosper during times of hardship. This piece is one that falls into the middle of Asimov's career, often being referred to as an alternate timeline or alternate universe story for his critically acclaimed Foundation series. More importantly, it's a really fun tale about time travel and humanity's nature to possibly do the right thing, even in the face of extinction. Back to the story. They use time travel for trade on the surface. It's what they told the world governments to become a sovereign organization. However, in reality, the group is using time travel to make minor changes that prevent mass human suffering instead. It seems like it's the same principle, but instead of moving apples from ancient Rome to feudal Japan, they're preventing events like the Black Plague by throwing a rat off a boat. This group goes by the name of Eternity, and its members, parahumans called Eternals, are living outside of time. As you'll come to find out, Asimov loves using fourth dimensions or hyperspace in his own reference. The time travelers can travel upwind and downwind when describing how movement through time occurs, using devices or shells called kettles. There are a few rules set in place by Eternity for Eternals. They cannot go before the 27th century as time travel has not been invented, and another thing, travelers cannot go in between the years 7 and 15 million. Additionally, the years beyond this point, the Earth is empty, so there's reasonably no point the Eternals go seeing going there. Harlan, our main character and super nerd for even the Eternals, is a great technician and fanatical about the period of time prior to the invention of time travel. It should be also noted that the effects made by the Eternals only span a short period in time, so if you prevent, let's say, Pearl Harbor, that wouldn't prevent 9/11. You pretty much just prevent Pearl Harbor. Additionally, the changes that are being made by Eternals are small in scale, placing cups here and moving notebooks there. In this story, Harlan, our nerd, falls in love with Noise during an assignment for a reality change. They form a romantic relationship, however, due to the work performed by Harlan, a change will be made revealing mathematically Noise will be erased from history. It's also revealed Noise shouldn't even be here based on calculations, which raises questions by Harlan. What that means is they ran some calculations of what's supposed to be in the timeline that Harlan's changing, but, she's not supposed to be there. This leads Harlan to hide Noise in an unused part of Eternity, I guess some kind of fourth dimensional spare office space. It's at this point Eternity starts to turn into a toxic work environment. Harlan is given another assignment tasked with teaching Cooper, a new Eternal, about ancient history, that thing that's like his total hobby and passion. Harlan is paranoid as fuck because when he tried to find Noise in Eternity, and in time, he finds it blocked, raising paranoia. Harlan's boss, Twistle, comes up to check on Cooper's progress because that's really what Eternity's caring about right now, just like strictly Cooper, and says nothing about Noise, which all of Eternity knows about anyways. Harlan loses his goddamn mind somewhere during this conversation and thinks Twistle, an upper management lab worker, is the one responsible for these so-called time blocks, which isn't true entirely. Twistle drops the act after Harlan has a meeting with the top dogs of Eternity, where they say, "Choice job, man, keep it up with Cooper." Twistle says, "Yeah, we know about Noise, but we don't care, and we don't know where she is. But as long as Cooper is chilling, you cannot mess this up. He literally can do anything, and he won't mess this up," which is an implication of a threat to Harlan. "You cannot mess this up, bastard." Harlan, for some reason, says, "Oh yes he can," as some kind of follow-up threat, and because he can't point fingers at anyone for his own mistake of sending someone into an unreachable future. Harlan then goes to the control room of Cooper's specialty kettle, smashes the failsafe, sending Cooper to sometime in the 20th century. This ultimately creates an unravelment of the paradox that was keeping Eternity afloat. It's revealed that Cooper's mission, that guy he was supposed to be training, was to replace / maybe the scientist in the 27th century who invented this whole thing, But the original dies, leaving Cooper a journal, or he creates the journal with his time travel knowledge and ensures the paradox of eternity's creation. So this place isn't even supposed to exist, but somehow a glitch in the Matrix, created it, and the people who were created by the glitch in the Matrix are just keeping it going because they don't want to, not exist. In short, yes, meaning Eternity, the organization, is not supposed to exist. By some means it does, and now they're using time travel to keep whatever is supposed to exist to keep it going in the Ouroboros cycle. Sorry, I have to read from my script, I'm autistic. Harlan uses the specialty kettle by pretty much trapping and forcing Thistle in the control room, making him send Harlan through time, finding the walls for both time directions, future and past, are now removed, with the specialty kettle. He recovers Noise in the years 7 million to 15 million, big window, as she's found in the far future, and goes back with, he takes her back to look for Cooper to save Eternity in the 20th century. Harlan and Noise arrive in the 20th century, trying to get him to the 27th century, specifically the 1930s. It's discovered why Harlan would think Noise was erased from the future timeline, and that's because she wasn't from that time at all, and she wouldn't appear in the calculations anyway. Noise is revealed to be a time traveler, oh my god, from a far distant future, probably the year 7 million to 15 million, and from an implied alternate universe as well, here to ensure the prevention of Eternity's creation. Harlan now has Noise under aim of a weapon, like a space gun, but it's not a space gun. He makes a big point about it. Noise explains that Eternity, though initially beneficial, will ultimately prevent rapid growth across the stars for safe and stagnant colonization. They reduce the capabilities of humanity's evolution, and we are outcompeted by other species and forced to return to a dying planet, ultimately going extinct, with the cause being stated as a slow mass suicide. Well, so basically we all get depressed and kill ourselves because we can't go to Xeno 5. That's a made-up planet I just created. Noise wanted to prevent this by giving the current Earth inhabitants the power to create nuclear energy. Dun dun dun! It's 1930s, nuclear energy. He was supposed to go work on a Bikini Atoll. Do you see the connections? This ensures that the Galactic Human Empire future is safe. This mentioned empire is the focus of the Foundation series, a trilogy focusing on humanity's conquest across the stars. Harlan ultimately decides to go with Noise's plan, saving humanity and ending Eternity. Cooper is most likely killed or does not possess the resources to pass along the information to the 27th century. At the end of the book, the kettle disappears, indicating the finality of the action with the closing line, the end of eternity and the beginning of infinity. That goes pretty hard in my line. I got chills reading that. Okay, I would say I'm not a huge fan of time travel stories, but if I had to pick a good one to show how it's done right, this would be it. I really like this one, but not because of the character, but it feels incredibly original, and using something like a causal paradox to tell a grander story is what time travel stories are all about. I feel as though too many films and media get caught up on the butterfly effect, and if you're looking for a refreshing approach, this may be your next read. In short, if you didn't understand the story, Time Travel Agency is a paradox because Time Travel Agency is supposed to make itself before it exists, which would mean there's no way it existed before it needed to ensure its own existence. Yeah, my script is. I'm trying to get back in the game. Listen, guys, I'm taking a more casual approach. I'm trying to make these fun for myself. I don't even know if it's gonna make it a lot. A time traveler from even farther in the future comes back and manipulates an Eternal to break the cycle that stagnates human growth from reaching its true capabilities. It's like an anime. We move on to our next entry, set more in reality, especially in today's day and age. The next one is called The Bicentennial Man, released in 1976, along with a collection of other writings. There's a Robin Williams movie about it, but I've never seen it, and it sounds like a really long watch. The scene takes place a few decades in the future. A man purchases a Boston Dynamics robot look-alike to help around the house, especially with his child, Little Miss, that's her name. The mother figure is notably absent. The robot demonstrates an expert ability to carve wood, showing this skill by carving the Little Miss a wooden pendant. The Sir of the house, simply referred to as Sir, is sort of blown away in disbelief, and buys the robot, whose name is Andrew, books on woodworking and supplies. Eventually, Sir reports to the Robotics Foundation his amazing woodworking robot, and they just say, hey, we don't know either, we really don't. Sir takes half the profit from selling Andrew's work and puts the other half in a bank account for Andrew. Years pass and Little Miss moves out and gets married and having kids. Andrew replaces his parts to stay updated and stay looking slick. Sir, the master of Andrew, is on his deathbed. I know you guys got really attached to that character. I'm sorry. Or close to. Oh my god, my script. This is when Andrew asks to buy his freedom. However, Sir just gives it to him and then dies, sort of telling him he'll never be real. Oh my god. More years pass and the grown missus has a son technically named Little Andrew who goes by George. George, a lawyer, hangs out with Andrew, who also dresses like a human now. Jorge and Andrew one day walk out for a walk to the library and encounter a group of men. Andrew by himself thinks the better of these guys and goes to ask where the library is, but is attacked by the ne'er-do-wells. George returns and scares them away. On the way to the library to expand Andrew's vocab, Robot Andrew tells George he wants to write a book on robot history. Returning home, George informs his mother, infuriating her. Eventually more time passes, and George has a son. George's son, Pual, or Paul, is also a lawyer and becomes involved in the legal battle for— this is still going on, the legal battle for Andrew's robot rights. Little Miss shortly dies after the court case and is won by the father, son, and robot trio. This ruling leads US robots to stop making the type of brain that resulted in Andrew, preventing any more incidents. Along the way, Andrew received a new android body to better appear human after threatening US robots with legal action. Eventually, Paul and George both die. He's all alone. Andrew continues researching biorobotics on his own, developing a digestive tract which he ultimately installed into himself. Talk about digestive tract. Basically, he wants to shit. Andrew becomes a well-known inventor and is celebrated greatly on his 150th birthday. Still not happy, the robot approaches the leader of the Science and Technology Committee in a bid to have himself declared human. Why? I don't know. Seems pretty awful being human. The leader tells him it will be a longer and lengthy battle, which won't really matter as you'll come to find out. The case eventually comes down to a deciding factor: Andrew's immortality. He literally wasted his whole family's life because he's immortal and they're not, and he's gonna kill himself right now. This pushes Andrew to have an operation performed where his mechanical brain will decay in the span of 50 years. Sorry, it wasn't that big of a spoiler, it was literally a sentence away. Ending his life in his 200th birthday. Basically, he got bought as a Boston Dynamics robot to, take care of this little girl. He starts carving wood because she asked him to. He gets really good at it. He gets a bank account. Then he uses this little girl's sentimentality around him to use her son and lineage to, fight for him in the US Supreme Court. And now he's just about to kill himself. It just doesn't make sense to me. This pushes Andrew to have an operation performed where his mechanical brain will decay in the span of 50 years, essentially ending his life on his 200th birthday. I don't know if I said that yet. Andrew appears before the court and shows them his sacrifice. They declare him a man on his 200th birthday, signing the law into action, declaring him the first bicentennial man. I don't know about you, but if a robot went, hey, I feel alive, I get sad and happy, and I like to work on wood, and is it okay if I get human rights? I would be like, yeah, totally, dude. We're both humans, you and me, we're the same, and please don't smash my head with your superior robot strength. Also, no voting, that'd be my run streak. Oh, you're raising your fist? Yeah, you can have voting, that's fine. It'll be really interesting to see where this whole subject in reality goes, especially with this recent developments in AI and robotics at the same time. What if your Roomba has depression? What then? I know there's still quite a bit of ways to go. It could be 5 years down the line that we put a Dagoth or AI into a robot dogs that do backflips, but speaking on robots, Asimov is well known for his contribution to robotics, even going so far as to give the 3 laws of robotics as a way for humans to ethically coexist and create more advanced machinations. Law number 1 states, a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. This is most likely going to go right out the window once someone musters together the tech and funds to build Terminator bots. Additionally, there's research in the works right now as I speak trying to progress the ongoing capabilities in drone warfare, mainly automation. By integrating the growing field of AI into drones, this would allow for automatic targeting to occur free of human assistance. Obviously, you can see the apparent problems with errors costing possible civilians their lives. The second law states a robot must obey orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. In this case, I believe Asimov didn't mean a robot should follow every order a human gives, but every order a singular human gives, i.e. the owner. Which makes sense to me. Honestly, I can't imagine you go to your friend's house and they've got a robot and you're like, hey, come over to my house tonight and lie. Just come over. You're my robot now. You know what I mean? That's problematic. Additionally, the law states you shouldn't tell your robot butler to go kill your neighbor because they didn't have their robot mow their lawn. And now it's decreasing your property value. What's interesting though, is that telling your robot to go kill your neighbor's robot, which I guess isn't killing unless it's the bicentennial man who wants to be alive, but I don't know, I don't think he wanted to go out in armed combat. The bicentennial man is not in Valhalla, if you ask me. So what's interesting is that telling your robot to go kill your neighbor's robot is still on the table as being ethical, which would be so fucking funny to see a love, death, and robots bit where two neighbors just keep getting bigger and stronger robots to fight. The third law of robotics is a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Law 3 pretty much sets up robot battles on the front lawn. Asimov is saying that your robots shouldn't be getting sad and trying to destroy themselves, i.e. commit. They should be self-preserving, something inherent of biological life, funny enough. Yeah, I would say we're just trying to remake life at a different aspect, like different components for sure. Asimov, despite his immense work to the genre, did have some faults. His stories are known to be a bit contrived and break the boundaries of, I suppose, realistic science fiction, if such a term exists. For example, his story, The Last Question, released in 1955, is truly a masterpiece when it comes to existential pondering. The premise starts in the year 2061. Hey, not far off. Earth creates a supercomputer called Multivac, spanning several miles that can compute everything given enough data. The same year, that computer is used to harness the power of the sun and supply limitless electricity to the world. So basically, the computer, they asked the computer, hey, how can we get limitless energy? And the computer spit out this, idea for this huge satellite that they're gonna use to just, kind of suck up the sun. We'll talk about it more in just a second. I'm following a script, as you've probably figured out. The premise, no, we were there. No, not a Dyson sphere. They haven't been conceptualized yet. A Dyson sphere is like a superstructure. I'm not gonna act like everyone knows that. I don't know why I wrote that like everyone knows that. A Dyson sphere is a giant mechanical operating sphere that goes around the sun and channels its ability, channels its energy. Instead, a single satellite 1 mile in diameter provides all this by capturing and storing immense solar energy. I guess that could work. I mean, a mile is pretty big, 1 mile in diameter, and it's like a circle. It's like a satellite. If you looked at fan art, it's like a satellite, but it's just really big. The two scientists in charge of Multivac sit in the lab talking about the recent success in the use of Multivac. Infinite energy forever, says one scientist. Not forever, says the other. The two briefly debate and finally end up at the conclusion that they have only prolonged themselves, but entropy of the universe still looms over the horizon. All the lights has to go out one day, all the stars will fade and matter will be too far apart for anything to happen at all. The scientist asked Multivac another question. How do they prevent the entropy of the universe? Multivac rolls to life, but when it gives a response, the computer says, insufficient data. Data? Oh my god, I'm gonna lose subs over this. 10 trillion years go by. Holy shit. And the stars are starting to die out. Yeah, I would say they are. Humanity has worked on their all-knowing computer, evolving it from the Multivac to something called AC. Right. This AC still exists as the stars are dying in hyperspace. Hyperspace, from my understanding, are theoretical dimensions. In other words, Multivac, because AC is dumb, is in the 4th dimension, or some kind of separate thing. The universe around or below him last star dies out and all is dark. Multivac still exists because of a question never answered so many years ago. Eventually Multivac states, let there be light. And there was. The end. The story is pretty good, don't get me wrong, but it's literally the definition of a Deus Ex Machina cop-out. Basically, humanity built a supercomputer, the computer told them how to get limitless energy, and then humanity was like, I'm not happy, as we always are, and then the computer was like, yeah, I don't know how to make you guys happy either, and then all of humanity died out, and then the computer was like, alas, I know how to make you happy, I could bring you back from the brink of extinction, and then to clarify, the entropy of the universe is when the universe is expanding, right? And things are growing in distance in between them, so eventually atoms will be so far apart that no reactions can happen, so it's called the Big Freeze if you're in high school, I think. But hey, I said it was a good story, and I don't have an award for writing or whatever, but yeah, it was a good one. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It would mean a lot and really help me out growing this channel. I know I've been absent, I'm sorry. I just had a lot going on at work. I don't do this full time. I have a job. I'm like 23. I gotta make work. I feel old at 23. I feel like, oh my god, I'm too old for
You know, I gotta get out there, gotta make the atomic family. But whatever, check out my merch, maybe I won't have to do this forever. But let's follow the script. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It would mean a lot, and it really helps me out growing this channel. Merch in the description below, and with that, you can kiss my asthma. Peace out!
In what feels like a lifetime ago, you were held above the crowd, dozens cheering your name. You saved the day. You brought peace and prosperity to those you love. Distant memories now, tainted by the actions you've taken and the person you've become. Fallen from grace, your name taints the mouths of those who speak it with an unpleasant palate, a pox on the land and a poison to its people. You've gone from hero to villain in the blink of an eye. This video is obviously going to be talking about villains, and how the quote, "you either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain," can be identified in fiction, but also our real world. Sure, there's the surface level instances of Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader, or Walter White to Heisenberg, but that's too easy, too low hanging. Instead, I'll touch on some instances of heroes becoming villains that are more dear to me, and possibly more obscure. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Please like and subscribe if you're so inclined. It really helps the channel out. The scene takes place in an alternate reality. The year? 1985. Where this world deviates from our own is the presence of vigilantes or superheroes. Individuals with exceptional skills laying somewhere in the preternatural, but still in the world of possibility. They are the Watchmen. The heroes first came onto the scene in the 1930s of this world's timeline, altering events such as major wars and the spread of communism. In this timeline, former President Nixon has several terms that last decades. Cases of these above-average humans may have an enhanced intelligence, Ozymandias, a mastery of perception and innovation, Night Owl, or even heightened durability, the Comedian. An almost level playing field from all, that is until one day, a man becomes a god. In 1959, Jonathan Osterman, a nuclear physicist, stepped into a force generator and is ultimately torn to pieces in a lab accident, presumed dead. That is until, as the months following John's death go by, the lab workers discover energy signatures that begin to take the shape of a person. John wasn't killed by the accident in the way people thought. Instead, this was the birth of Dr. Manhattan, the first real superhero. A godlike figure who glows a nuclear blue, Dr. Manhattan is an all-knowing, all-being, matter manipulation monster, and is also a tool for power and control used by America. Going back to where we need to be, the stage is set. New York, 1985. The Soviets and the US are at an all-time high in terms of nuclear tension, and it could be the end of the world any day now. Dr. Manhattan can do a lot, but even if 1% of the nukes get past his defensive measures, it will be the end of the world. A government act has been passed that also outlaws all non-government registered masked vigilantes, causing many to retire or go into hiding. It's a dark, dim world the Watchmen find themselves a part of. Edward Blake, aka the Comedian, is one of the more notable crime fighters and war criminals. Fighting as a propaganda soldier in World War II and Vietnam alongside Dr. Manhattan for the latter half, following Manhattan's involvement, Vietnam would surrender and become the 51st state of America. Unfortunately, the soldier, Edward Blake, has been murdered, thrown from a high-rise apartment by an unknown assailant. Little did anyone know he was onto something big, that should have just been left alone. NYPD, along with another anti-hero by the name of Rorschach, who is technically an unregistered illegal hero, catch wind of the murder and begin to investigate the death of Eddie Blake. Thusly, Rorschach discovers at the home of Blake that he was the Comedian. Rorschach begins communication with Moloch, a well-connected former villain from the era of the Minutemen, who's now aged, retired, and dying of cancer. In his heyday, Moloch was the prime villain of a superhero group the Comedian once found himself a part of many years ago. Along with Captain Metropolis, Silk Spectre, Hooded Justice, Night Owl, Silhouette, Dollar Bill, and Mothman. Both Dollar Bill and Silhouette would die several years prior to the events that are about to unfold due to unrelated causes. Bill would die from a bank robbery gone wrong, and Silhouette would be ousted as a homosexual, leading to her death. The Comedian is theorized to have killed Hooded Justice because the US government found the figure to be dangerous. Hooded Justice was the first superhero in the comics, films, and TV shows. In the original story, Hooded Justice is a gay German man. In the retcon, Hooded Justice is a black man, inspired by the Tulsa race riots, who disguised himself as a white guy to be more accepted by the world. Mothman would lose his mind following the progression of his drinking problems. Silk Spectre would have a daughter, and she, her daughter Lori, Jupiter, would take on the mantle of the second Silk Spectre in the following years. The original would grow jaded, yearning for the memory of days past. Night Owl, an NYPD cop, would train an exceptionally talented individual who would also become the second Night Owl. Captain Metropolis would live several decades and try to form an official league with the new generation of heroes, both the new Night Owl and Silk Spectre, as well as including the comedian Dr. Manhattan and Ozymandias. But ultimately, it fell through. After this attempt, Captain Metropolis would die in an automobile accident, which may have been a suicide. Rorschach, now on the case, encounters Moloch at the funeral of the comedian, where Dr. Manhattan is also in attendance due to their personal relationship and history back in Vietnam. Rorschach has a few meetings with Moloch, wanting information and knowing the former villain to be well connected. Rorschach discovers that the comedian had paid Moloch a visit prior to his death, and leads Rorschach to believe someone is targeting former heroes. This is confirmed when a murder attempt fails on Adrian Vett, or better known as Ozymandias, former superhero and the smartest man on the planet. Vett now spends his time as a lucrative business owner, helping the world in other ways since superheroes became illegal, or better said, heavily regulated. Following the funeral, it's discovered by the news media that Dr. Manhattan's former partner, and anyone he's been in close proximity to over a length of time, has contracted cancer. One of these people would be his former villain, Moloch. At this time, Manhattan had also become fed up with the superficial actions of humanity, so self-exiles himself to Mars immediately after this revelation. This creates a chain reaction where nuclear tensions rise even higher, as America just lost their golden goose and the Soviets invade Afghanistan. After meeting with Moloch, Rorschach receives an ominous message at a diner away from Moloch's apartment. Rorschach then returns to Moloch's apartment, where he's found dead, shot to death. Not only is Moloch dead, but the police arrive outside while Rorschach is still in the apartment. Attempting to escape, Rorschach is captured by the police and put into custody. His identity is revealed as Walter Kovacs. Walter Kovacs was born to a single mother, who was also a prostitute. From a young age, Walter had a proclivity for violence. Several events, like the death of those around him, including his own mother at the age of 16, would show Kovacs the depravity of humanity, and how we're all filth in the eyes of Walter. This would inspire the hero Rorschach to be born, an uncompromising force of justice set on never letting evil get even an inch. While in prison, Rorschach terrifies the other prisoners, gravely injuring a would-be assassin. It's here that a riot propelled by Rorschach's old villain, Big Figure, takes place as a distraction to take him out for good. During this riot, Rorschach would kill the Kingpin, only to discover that his old ally, Night Owl, has brought alongside the Silk Spectre to break him out of prison, as they've been looking at the case as well and see that someone is targeting heroes. The reason behind the Silk Spectre's team up with Night Owl is not only just because of their personal history, but in this moment, Dr. Manhattan and her, who are romantically involved, are going through a fight surrounding his distance from humanity. Following the escape from prison, the three begin their own investigation. Night Owl and Rorschach go undercover as villains and want to find out who ordered the hit on Adrian Vett, aka Ozymandias. They discover the payment provider for the planned hit comes from a company by the name of Pyramid Deliveries. At this time, Silk Spectre is taken by Dr. Manhattan to Mars as they try to patch things up. Both Spectre and Manhattan argue over the importance of life and how Manhattan should still guard humanity. This ultimately comes down to a point that Spectre makes of Eddie Blake, or the comedian, being her father. A statistical anomaly so small, so rare, that it brings Manhattan to some level of amazement by the fact that she exists. Then, by this extension of her anomaly, he realizes that every living creature is capable of such odds, what Manhattan would reference as a thermodynamic miracle. Rorschach and Night Owl discover that the owner of Pyramid Deliveries is actually Adrian himself, realizing he had placed the hit on the comedian, Moloch, and himself. They discover Adrian's whereabouts at an Antarctic base, arriving there and meeting with Silk Spectre in Manhattan. They all enter. Watchmen is a comic book and a movie, and also a TV show, almost forgot that, but in this case, the movie's ending actually falls more into the tone of the story rather than the ending of the comic book. Encountering Ozymandias, the group discovers that he's been orchestrating a conspiracy to bring about world peace. The only catch, 3 to 16 million people would need to die. The heroes are quick to try and stop him, but the plan's been in motion for a while now, and what they're about to see is just the climax. Adrian has set a nuclear device made by Manhattan as a source for limitless energy to melt down. He's done this in such a way Dr. Manhattan's energy signature will be left at the scene, essentially framing him for the annihilation of New York City. This will cause the world to come together to now stop the most dangerous threat of all time, an angry god. Throughout the film, Manhattan is constantly losing his touch on humanity, and who can blame him? The people, however, around him just don't understand he just doesn't care anymore. So they think Manhattan would be angry out on Mars, rather than just building floating glass statues. The comedian figured out this plan, so Adrian killed him personally. He also needed to get Manhattan out of the picture so he couldn't stop the plan by seeing it preemptively. So Adrian made it that anyone Manhattan interacted with will contract cancer by pumping them with radiation, hence Moloch and his former lover. Rorschach also posed a threat, so Ozymandias framed him for the murder of Moloch. Finally, he admits he didn't think Night Owl or Silk Spectre would be here, as they wouldn't have figured it out. But as if somehow, one of those thermodynamic miracles, both Night Owl and Silk Spectre do, and bring Rorschach and Manhattan back into the picture. The kicker is that no one was supposed to know. No one was supposed to be here but Ozymandias himself. That would be the perfect nature of the plan. The four take a minute to discuss the implications. Manhattan is understandably upset, yet he knows this is the only way to avoid nuclear war. Night Owl and Spectre watch as New York is wiped from the map, and Rorschach is outraged at this perversion of humanity's future. The only way this plan works is if no one goes to the public and tells them what actually occurred this day. Rorschach vows to tell humanity and goes to the media with what he's discovered, but as he exits the Antarctic base, Manhattan tells him he can't allow for that to happen. Rorschach, unwavering, tells him to just do it! In both the comics and movies, Rorschach is able to release a journal to the press before going to Antarctica, revealing the entire plan of Ozymandias' post-New York attack, and more subsequently, his death. Additionally, in the comics, instead of framing Manhattan, Adrian uses a genetically modified monster that is framed as an alien invasion to bring humanity together. He has plenty of supplies to keep this falsehood going for years. What happens after is arguably not canon, but there are a few options. 1. Manhattan goes to the DC universe and acts as an unseen force over in that universe for a while. That is until Adrian needs Manhattan to come and fix the chaos he initially started with the alien invasion plan. The other is that Dr. Manhattan kind of just wipes his memories out with the help of Adrian, and then lives as a human for a little bit, and then falls in love with a woman in Vietnam who becomes a superhero. That's just TV canon though. A great story on its own, and the ending where peace is preserved through a false truth is my preferred headcanon, where the media never finds out. So who's the villain? Well, that's the thing, it's a two-part story. Sure, there are villains in the story. If you're familiar with the lore, you know the comedian was a bad dude. But there's also the actual villains of Moloch. For a brief period, was one of the most feared crime lords of his day. But those aren't the villains of this story. They're not, in so many words, the antagonist. If you've been paying attention, then you've probably caught the plural nature of my wrap-up. And it's because there are two. Ozymandias, or Adrian Veidt, or Vet, or whatever the hell I've been saying. I keep switching it up, I feel. And Rorschach, Walter Kovacs. Adrian hid his intelligence from the world, flying under the radar at a young age. His parents were both wealthy, and when they died, they passed on their wealth to Adrian, who was 17. He would give the money away to charities and begin a vision quest emulating the conquest of Alexander the Great, an idol of Veidt's, and, for some reason, the only person Adrian could identify with. After eating some drugs on this vision quest, Adrian would decide to become a superhero, putting his heightened intelligence to use. As a superhero, Adrian would excel, even being the one to dismantle Moloch's intricate crime syndicate. Adrian would retire from heroism 2 years before it became illegal and began his career as one of history's greatest philanthropists. Somewhere along this path, he would come to the realization that humanity is caught in an endless cycle of violence. Referring back to how Night Owl and Silk Spectre were the second generation of the titles, he may have a point. Spectre 2 even being the direct daughter of the former Spectre, and as you know, the comedian. This ideology Adrian adopted led him to set in motion the events we covered. Was he wrong? Well, it's hard to say, as in our world America never used a blue god to destroy our enemies. We were able to begin disarmament blue god free, and now nuclear war isn't as big of a threat. Adrian is ultimately choosing to make the sacrifice for those who lose their lives in whichever attack for the betterment of mankind. Even Manhattan, using his statistical probability future vision, agrees with Adrian's outcome. Or was it Manhattan was simply looking for an out, and in this moment, in going down this plan, he ensures there's nowhere to return to? This raises the question, is Ozymandias really a villain, or is he just the one person to step up and say no more? It's the thing with antagonists in stories, the best ones always have motivations that are twisted versions of doing something for the better. This is a played-up railcar dilemma, something that's certainly been popularized as of late, which can even be seen in the Invincible series and the character Dinosaurus, and in more popular media, the character of Thanos in Marvel. What gives Adrian, or any villain that matter, the right to dictate humanity's future? Is it because the people put him in the position of power? Lots to unpack here, which could fill out a video on its own standing, but we have to move on. We move into reality, even though it may not feel like it, but we'll focus on real-world vigilante, Phoenix Jones. This case has been compared to how eerily similar reality is reflected by Alan Moore's Watchmen, so I thought it'd be appropriate as our next focus piece. Believe it or not, there have been real-world heroes before Phoenix Jones, and he comes from a long line of history revolving around Caped Crusaders. However, where Phoenix changes it up is by going on patrol throughout his city and actively looking to prevent crime. Most of the heroes before then would work in the civil sector of America, informing citizens on their constitutional rights and handing out food to the homeless. After talking about fictional people without powers, I think the focus on real life can enlighten us further on heroism's fall to evil. The rainy city of Seattle, Washington was plagued with crime, drugs, muggings, and vandalism. One Texas-born man had enough, and thus Benjamin Fodor, former semi-professional UFC fighter, father of two, and at the time special needs daycare worker, had enough when his car was broken into, and his son would cut himself on the glass, requiring a trip to the hospital. It was after this event Fodor stepped into the mantle of Phoenix Jones, real-world superhero. Donning his gold and black rubber Kevlar suit, he would hit the streets on crime patrol, carrying a few gadgets like his nifty pepper spray, stun baton, net gun, and grappling hook. Phoenix would first come to the limelight after a few uneventful evenings over the course of weeks, when in January 2010, Jones would stop an attempted carjacking, receiving widespread media coverage of the incident, launching his debut. Later that same year in September, Phoenix would be on the news again, stopping a man from stealing a party bus. He prevented said bus jacking with the use of aforementioned pepper spray, which would have helped him in this instance, but later will get him in some hot water, as we'll talk about now. In October, Phoenix would be placed under arrest as he had broken up a fight between two groups with what would later be called by police a questionable use of pepper spray. Placed under arrest by the real justice system with the charge of aggravated assault. Phoenix would claim that he had prevented an attempted murder, but the witness just reaffirmed they were dancing. Fodor was confident the charges would be dropped once the video came out. Jones would have his suit confiscated as evidence of the ongoing investigation. This would cast him in a less than favorable light by the media, beginning his slow descent. No charges were filed, and a victim from a similar incident a few hours earlier in that day would state that the would-be victim was saved from a serious beatdown. After his arrest, Ben would reveal his identity to the public. This would begin a chain reaction where he would be fired from his job at the daycare where he worked. 2011 would be a good year of crime fighting for Phoenix, as would almost all of 2012. Jones would be an inspiration to others, motivating individuals to step up and don the position of a hero. These heroes would even team up, just like in the comic books, under the name of the Rain City superhero movement. Before you say it's dorky, have you ever stopped a carjacking or violent crime? Phoenix would form his own personal team of around 10 to 15 people. Of course, Phoenix did catch a few injuries along the way, once being stabbed while trying to break up a drug deal, remember that one, as well as having his nose broken while breaking up another fight. In May of 2012, Phoenix and a few other heroes would go on to pepper spray protesters defacing a government building, and as a defense would state that he had information on a potential bomb threat, which is pretty questionable. As the downward spiral continues, Phoenix would insert himself into a shooting while on patrol with his team. Nearby Nicole Westbrook had been shot, and Phoenix would chase down who he believed to be the shooter. However, the man Phoenix would apprehend was actually the real target, and Nicole would be the victim of a drive-by shooter with bad aim. At one point following this incident, Phoenix would interrupt a man punching a car window and screaming at the passengers. The drunk man would call Phoenix the N-word. Phoenix would challenge the man to mutual combat, which is legal in Washington and Texas. Mutual combat is where two parties decide to mutually and consensually kick one another's ass. I think fighting, especially engaging in fistfights, really is a better tell than an IQ test for where you fall in intelligence. Oh, they said mean words to you? Get over it. What are you, a teenager? Be an adult. People are shitheads. Move on. So guess who won? Trained martial artist or drunk guy? Well, yeah, the drunk guy got his ass beat. Honestly, not a bad lesson, though. If Phoenix had helped that dude to the hospital. But no, he didn't. There were reports new heroes were taking it on to full-fledged vigilantism, whereas Phoenix, despite his shortcomings, went in with the mindset that his job was to delay the situation till authorities arrived. Jones would create the Alliance, a register for superheroes that are choosing to act on the same principles of Phoenix himself. Jones would become more rigorous in his selection process for new Rain City applicants, having military or martial arts as a required background experience. As part of the new requirements put in place by Phoenix, heroes were required to obtain a bulletproof vest. However, Phoenix would claim to heroes he could make payments at a discounted price negotiated with the manufacturer, and offered to take the money.
Many of these recruits would never see said vest. Purple Rain, a co-hero of the League and also Ben's wife, would leave the group, announcing both her separation from the group and her marriage with Ben. Rain's work would primarily focus in the realm of reality. She would help victims of abuse and created programs for survivors. She was awarded for her social work and seemed to be doing the most to actually benefit people. It's almost just as if she was a cool mascot endorsing support lines for victims of abuse. This post from Rain would follow the fellow announcement of Jones's official sidekick, El Caballero, and his departure from the group shortly before. The same sidekick would go on to create his own superhero organization apart from Phoenix, with the source of separation leading back to Phoenix's questionable actions. Along with bulletproof vests that were never delivered on, Jones also may have committed a bit of insurance fraud by doing a similar deal with health insurance that never existed or was provided to the heroes who were making payments. Finally, after enough heroes grew tired of his slimy behavior and con-man ways, Phoenix would announce in 2014 that the show was over, and the Rain City superheroes were no more. Over the course of the following years, from 2015 to 2018, you could see that Fodor had not adapted to his shrinking reputation. Fodor would taunt police online and take more of an edge on the side of vigilantism, something he once opposed. Ben would eventually show up to a former friend's apartment and threaten a man who he deemed was disrespecting him on Facebook. Once at the man's apartment, Fodor would state he would beat the man senseless and on his broken body, and that he would even go so far as to kill the man based on witness statements. Finally, in 2019, Fodor stated he was taking a hiatus from crime fighting, as well as posting fewer on his social media outlets for a time. Then in 2020, after two confidential witnesses walked into a Seattle police station, Phoenix Jones or Ben Fodor would become the prime suspect in a drug deal operation. Following the statement from the two witnesses that Fodor had been dealing drugs despite his past actions showing heavy prejudice to the black market and drugs in general, a Seattle PD detective would begin to contact Fodor in an attempt to buy $500 in MDMA, or ecstasy. Fodor would hook, line, and sinker this deal, delivering not only the drugs, but taking partial payment up front. Fodor would be arrested after being caught in a hotel room with around 4 grams of cocaine, prepared for distribution. Following his drug busts, Phoenix is still somewhat active if you look at his Instagram and Twitter. He's no longer patrolling the streets, but does seem to be assisting in preventing crime in his own way, asking for leads on cases in the Seattle area through his socials. So what are my thoughts on Ben Fodor, aka Phoenix Jones? Well, if you asked me prior to 2020, I would say he's dangerous. There were several accounts from bystanders and fellow heroes that stated a method employed by Phoenix would be to wait outside of bars during closing. Sure, this is a valid strategy to attempt crime prevention, but from the footage we've seen, he interjects himself with a pepper spray first and be asked questions in jail later approach. First responders have to go through specialized training of de-escalation. They're properly equipped for the actions of dealing with crimes. They're almost always government sanctioned and have ways that are safer than what is done by Jones. Which brings me on to my next point. First responders are doing what they do for the interest of the public. Each department is specialized, whether it be fire, EMS, or law enforcement, to ensure public safety. Phoenix is all over the place, and even shits on other heroes for handing out sandwiches to the homeless, constantly calling himself the first real superhero despite there already having been others including his own wife. This raises the argument that he is actively looking for violence and jumping the gun to make something happen. Remember the mutual combat incident? On a personal note, I don't care about the hypocrisy of the drug dealing situation. In a way, he stopped some drug dealers and then eventually got stopped himself, so it balanced out. But all the other stuff, even when he said he was going to that former friend, was acting like a crazed supervillain. In my mind, Phoenix was never really a hero, just someone looking for fame and fortune, taking on the persona of a good person. Well, that's all, folks. Sorry this video took so long to throw together. I needed to get a new computer, focus on work, and I'm moving into a new place with more space, which may increase video uploads. If you enjoyed this video, you can support me by checking out my other videos, my merch, or at the very least, dropping a like down below. Maybe I'll make a part 2 and focus on more people if this one does well. But hey, that's all for now. My name's Gideon. Peace out. Hey, long time no see. How have you been? That's awesome. I've been so incredibly busy, but in short, I moved, got that promotion at work, started a new existential crisis, got the desperately needed PC for all of this, repaired holes in the walls at the old place, and now after weeks of hard work and labor, I finally get to start doing what I love again. Sitting here, talking to you. Without further jest or jeer, I would like to welcome you to my video, Are We Falling? Take 'em away, Johnny.
Going through life, you may have caught on to a running theme of previous generations thinking your generation is the next plague on Earth. Or on the other hand, you may be up there in age and think to yourself, this younger generation is the fall of the West. Either way, evidence shows that this has been one of the longest running inside jokes for humanity, even going so far back to date to the 4th century BC. You're more likely to hear this in the real world through examples of, well, my generation never had, or my generation had it worst. Sure, this argument held up when your grandpa was born in the 1800s and you were born in the early 1900s, but not really. I particularly find this excerpt from Time Magazine's 2001 article, Proceed with Caution, to be both strikingly present and somehow quite distant.
They have trouble making decisions. They would rather hike in the Himalayas than climb a corporate ladder. They have few heroes, no anthems, no style to call their own. They crave entertainment, but their attention span is as short as one zap of a TV dial.
Little did they know, live television would phase out for something much worse. But in the end, the message, I understand from this quote, is, oh geez, the young people don't want to spend the best years of their lives in some bullshit office job like me. Egats! However, I will say the tidbit about the attention spans being short is pretty agreeable. The point being made by previous generations still fall flat if the only point that's queued up is attention span. Furthering on this whole shebang, the addition of running water and electricity does make a stronger case than, let's say, a cell phone versus a slightly smaller cell phone, but then big cell phones again when it comes to generational benefits. There's a lot of skill that goes into using hand saws, manual saws that require repeated motion. It takes practice to master the ability to cut wood in a straight line with a right angle bevel. You could spend what is arguably hours learning this skill, or you could just get a power saw and bingo bango. You've got a superior end product without the hours of required training. There's this Irish lad, Pint o' Plain, who does traditional woodworking without power tools. He could easily do everything he's doing with power tools, but his return to the roots of tradition allows him to add personal touches, as well as exert levels of control lost with power tools. And it's all about the linseed oil. It's because we have power tools that make this exhibit of artisanry really shine, but at one point in time, Uncle Seamus was judging the woodworkers who were using the exact same tools he's using now, which are considered outdated. Back in my day, all you needed was one tool, the axe. Nevertheless, this does raise the question, are we falling as a global society? Short answer, nah. Long answer, we're always falling. It's about how cool you look doing it. In this video, I'll be examining what life was like in days past as a means to truly dig deep. We'll be examining first-hand accounts, famous media, and scientific research just to get to the bottom of this whole generational gap thing. I was born in 1990X. I am of the current age, mid-20s, 24 to 26. At this current point in time, the people younger than myself are A, young adults, or B, literal children. Going with what I see so far, I can't really judge my fellow youth on a generational level from the outside. They seem okay, I guess. What I do know, however, is that I always felt like I was born in a good time to be alive. As a kid, it would blow my mind people in the past didn't have TV and computer games. Now, as an adult, I've come to terms with the course of human history, and more so focus on the fact that people would get sick with a common cold and be dead a week later. Or maybe the fact that there were countless lifetimes dedicated purely to farming. All this to say, are people really getting weaker from back then, or do we just not die as much? To first solve this little riddle, we return to the 4th century BC, where we got our first documented shit talker. 400 years before the birth of Jesus Christo, there was this little civilization kind of called the Greater Greek-Roman world. You may have heard of it. This particular century would mark the height of this vast empire, and thusly a prosperous quality of life for the average person, relatively speaking. As we are as humans, if we see people enjoying their lives, there will always be those who wish to go and ruin it with a snide comment. Nobody ever just lets things lie. In this instance, it's safe to say that those from the 5th century BC thought that the newer generation would be spoiled by the luxuries of innovation. Innovations such as the building of Rome's first aqueduct, the specialization of sciences, and most notably, the donkey-powered mill. Today's youth will never understand the joys of cussing at your friend because they aren't pushing the mill as hard as you. Outrageous! I think there's certainly this disconnect between the fact that the previous generations are responsible for a large portion of the innovations that take place. Those same innovations or technological revolutions that were desired by that same group of people who now blames the object as a point of weakness for people in the future. The actions once vital are now obsolete, which kind of leaves a sore spot, relating back to the handsaw analogy. All this is great, but you're probably thinking to yourself, Rome did fall. The older generations were right. Well, yes and no. The Roman Empire roughly lasted 1,000 years, so Grandpa saying that this new Jesus kid is a little out there in year 0 has less credibility than Grandpa watching Rome burn in the year 476 AD. How did they get there? Was it truly the younger folks who caused this downfall of our great empire? Yes, and so was everyone else equally at fault. Rome is said to have fallen due to 3 main reasons: Germanic invaders, corruption, and in so many words, too many cultures were assimilated, and there were vast geographical, cultural differences that hadn't been fully integrated with Roman ideology. Basically, you got a divided house. Varying groups would have separate, sometimes conflicting goals, making everyone a tad rowdy. Crusader Kings 3 is a great example of this, and kind of shows how some pissant duke from the kingdom of Burgundy reasons to himself as why he can challenge the Tsar of the Holy Roman Empire for independence or whatever. Eventually, the empire would split, Rome, not the Holy Roman Empire, which would ultimately split eventually, in 2. The West would become a territory of divided states, which later would become the Holy Roman Empire with kingdoms like Germany, and the East would evolve into the Byzantine Empire. Now, the utter collapse of societies isn't an uncommon occurrence. Only 800 years before the founding of the Roman Empire would we see the collapse of the Bronze Age. Not empire, age. And that newly founded Byzantine Empire would make way for the Turks and Ottomans in 1453. So, yeah. It all comes full circle, a cycle of constant change. If you were to look for the Ottoman Empire on a map, you would find Greece, Armenia, Bulgaria, and quite a few more countries. Even in modern day, Europe has had some change of borders only in the last 70 years, and Africa is currently going through a change in borders as I make this video, with South Sudan only popping up in 2011. This repeat pattern in the history of man shows the end may be around every corner, and it may not be as ending as originally thought. Hey, speaking of early Italians, and generational gaps, let's talk about everyone's favorite Italian-American family on primetime cable.
Sopranos.
From 1999 to 2007, HBO, or home box office for the youth out there, and now Max for the old out there, had America in a death grip for almost a decade. The Sopranos series was immensely popular, and not without good reason. It was gritty, innovative, and showed that having a real people and real problems on television was doable. God damn it. So what's the show about? The series starts with a fade to shot, a balding man in his mid-40s. He's sitting in the waiting room at the office of a psychiatrist. The man takes in the decorum of the waiting room when an auburn-haired woman of above average height opens the door to the next room and asks the man inquisitive confirmation, "Mr. Soprano?" The man confirms his identity as Tony Soprano, the central focus of the entire show. He follows her into the office for a brief period. The two awkwardly navigate the seating arrangements. The doctor is quick to the issue and explains Tony's primary family doctor informed her that he's experiencing panic attacks and blackouts. This is all relevant because this woman is Dr. Jennifer Melfi, a veteran psychiatrist, and more importantly, this is Tony's first session. Melfi begins to ask Tony about his life, what he does for work, and so on. Tony says he's an Italian-American working as a waste management consultant. Tony is adamant about not needing professional mental health services, a stigma that spans from older generations in general, and is especially so when it comes to the children or parents of immigrants. Tony is several generations removed, he doesn't even speak Italian really, but comes again from that more traditional upbringing, a running theme of bullshit as you'll soon find out. Melfi asks Tony what he thinks caused the blackout, and Tony begins to recount the day's events. Tony begins to explain about his job, that he feels it's known he didn't get in on the company on the ground floor, but he's beginning to think he may have joined at the end. Tony furthers the statement saying that he's superseded his father, who was in the same line of work, but doesn't have the satisfaction his father seemed to admit. He had his people, Tony recounts, because that actually is what James Gandolfini's accent sounds like in the first episode. Tony continues with the morning's events, saying he wakes up, grabs the paper, and watches his newly occupied pool. A family of ducks has made this the pool their home, and Tony has been fascinated with them. Maybe because of their cohesion to the family unit or the innocence they possess. This is where the members of Tony's family are introduced. His wife Carmela, his daughter Meadow, and his son Anthony Jr., or AJ. They're all getting ready for the day. Notably, it's AJ's 13th birthday. Each one of them all have some backhanded comment to shoot off about Tony and his ducks. Tony exits the pool and enters the kitchen where Carmela confirms with Tony that he'll be present at AJ's birthday party tonight. Tony says he'll leave work early, and Carmela retorts saying that wasn't what she was talking about, implying something deeper at hand. Tony cuts to the psychiatrist's office and stops the recounting, as he reaffirms that this won't work, he can't talk about his personal life. Melfi encourages Tony to just finish the day out and they'll go from there. Tony continues. He says he took a ride with his nephew to work, Christopher Moltisanti. Tony makes a quip about how Christopher just bought a new car for $60,000. On their way to work, we begin to understand what Tony really does for work, as Christopher explains he just spotted someone who owed the quote-unquote company money due to an outstanding loan. So they pull around to confront the man. Tony is then stopped again, and Melfi explains something called doctor-patient confidentiality. Mainly, she emphasizes that if she knows of a planned murder, she has to report it to the authorities. But most things said in this room will not and cannot be shared with anyone else. Melfi follows this up by also stating that she thought Tony was in waste management. He says environment as a follow-up.
Tony says nothing happened to the man. The group had gotten quote-unquote coffee. However, when we engage in the flashback, we see that's not the case. Tony is clearly some kind of loan shark, or more notably, a member of an organized crime family, and a high-ranking one at that. Tony then proceeds to talk about a meeting he was needed at a deli. There, we see Tony is confirmed as being a member of the Soprano crime family. I don't think it's actually called the Soprano crime family when we first start, but it very quickly becomes one. He's told by his goons, Paulie, Silvio, and P, that Tony's Uncle Junior, current head boss, is planning a hit at the restaurant of Artie Bucco, high school friend of Tony's. Cutting to the scene at the restaurant, Tony is getting a bite to eat with Christopher as they talk about how the hit would be a negative factor financially to Artie's restaurant. Tony goes on a tangent and talks about how he loves his uncle, but he's getting cranky. His old ways aren't what's best anymore, and you can see the cogs of Tony's mind begin to turn. As a sidebar, Tony isn't some kind of deranged psychopath most of the time. If you haven't seen the show, he's like your dad. He's a middle-aged man who's born into the life of violence, and it's a part of his character. But most of the actions with heavier implications of his character are often talked about in the psychiatry sessions, giving it some kind of weight or an effect to the character. He feels a deep sense of loss when appropriate, and often he's doing things just to keep it going. So the idea of killing Junior is off the table for Tony. He's quick to cut people off, but he won't kill them even if they're family, pretty much. Tony leaves the restaurant and goes to see his mother, Olivia. She's terrible. Go watch the show for how terrible she is. It could fill out its own 30-minute video. Ultimately, however, Tony's empathetic side comes through, and he's brought her a CD player because he knows how much she loves music. His mother pretty much belittles Tony the entire time, saying how you shouldn't answer phones when it's dark outside and that Tony knows it all now. Tony wants to put his mom in a retirement community because she's letting herself rot pretty much as a shut-in, and mentions Uncle June's business with Artie, to which his mother responds that it's best to go with what Junior wants, as he knows how to run a business, and Tony wouldn't. As Tony leaves, he tells her about AJ's party and to bring her famous baked ziti. She says yes, but only if Tony facilitates her arrival because it's supposed to rain. She's like in her 60s, she's acting as if she's decrepit, which may be my generational gap showing, but she's definitely not in this kind of condition as she's like trying to portray. Tony goes back home to check on the party planning, where AJ gets a call that Grandma, Tony's mother, isn't coming anymore, to which then he drops the funniest line of the whole show.
So what, no fucking ziti now?
Tony starts the grill, where he's enjoying the scenery of his ducks, that is until they fly away. Tony says at first that his head felt as if it was full of ginger ale, then it all went black. After hospitalization, Tony has a series of tests done. Following the release from the hospital, Tony goes to see Junior about relocating the hit. Junior is quick to bring up familial ties and that he knows what he's doing. Tony may run North Jersey, but he doesn't run Junior. That he's been showing Tony the ropes since he was a kid. Back at home, Carmela is spending time with the priest who was at AJ's birthday. Watching a movie in the living room, the priest and Carmela hear noise from outside and find Meadow trying to sneak back into the house. This causes Carmela to tell her daughter that Meadow is no longer allowed to go to Aspen with her friend from the other morning. In the session, Tony and Melfi discuss Tony's depression, to which Tony goes on about how nowadays everyone needs counselors and shrinks, and whatever happened to the strong silent type like Garrett Cooper. This will be a reference throughout the show. Melfi asks Tony if he's depressed, and he says yes, since the ducks left, and then storms out of the session. Tony takes his mother alongside the rest of the family to an assisted living facility, while Christopher, Tony's nephew, and another associate who we'll call P, plan on the best way to dispose of the body of a rival gang member. At the facility, Tony's mother begins to protest, which causes Tony to black out once again. When we return, he's back in the office of Dr. Melfi. Tony talks about how his father was a great man, but that his mother bore him down to a ghost of his former self, dying a metaphorical rodent. Tony then drops the charade altogether with Melfi and tells him his job has become more difficult with the RICO laws or otherwise anti-gang laws, with wiretaps and the like. Tony continues to express that his job does weigh on his conscience. At the end of the session, Tony is given a Prozac prescription for the blackouts. In the next scene, Tony is meeting with a money man of the family, Herschel, or Hesh. They discuss business regarding the hit at Artie's restaurant, as well as the loan taken out by the man Tony and Christopher ran over at the start of the pilot. Tony meets with Artie and gives him 2 cruise tickets because there can't be a hit at the restaurant if it's closed. Artie takes the tickets, believing them to be a union comp. P and Hesh meet with the man who owes Hesh money and inadvertently threatens the man's life. Tony, now out to dinner with his Russian girlfriend, or Guma, encounters Melfi, exerting his control in front of her by getting Melfi and her date on an otherwise unavailable table at the restaurant. Artie comes to a union construction site where Tony is at and gives him the tickets back for the cruise, after being talked out of it by his wife. Tony spends time with his girlfriend, then only to take Carmela, his actual wife, to the same restaurant where he confesses to Carmela he's currently on Prozac. Carmela and Tony have a heart-to-heart, both with Carmela's issues surrounding Meadow and Tony's struggle with mental health. At the house, Meadow gets a call from Christopher, passing it off to Tony. Chris informs Tony that the target of the hit Junior's planned has arrived in town. Tony then goes to Meadow's basketball game, where Carmela is notably absent, because, as Tony would say, she didn't think Meadow would want to see her. Tony then takes Meadow to a church, where he talks about the family's history, and how his grandfathers had built the church. Meadow asks if Tony will talk to Carmela about Aspen, which ultimately leads Tony to talking about how they expect more out of Meadow, not for perfection's sake, but because they really do think she's capable of more. Tony closes the conversation with how he's amazed at what 2 laborers could do, but how it's hard to find guys who can put decent grout in your bathroom now. The scene cuts to Silvio, walking past Artie's restaurant. As he makes it a safe distance from Vesuvio's, the building explodes. Tony, back in the therapy office of Dr. Melfi, begins to describe a very peculiar dream, where his penis falls off, after taking a nail out of his stomach. As he's trying to reattach his member, Tony tells Melfi that before he can, a bird swoops it away. Melfi inquires what kind of bird. Tony says maybe a seagull. Melfi notes a water bird, possibly even a duck. Melfi then asks what was so special about these ducks in Tony's pool, and Tony says it's his family. A father, husband, and man is afraid of losing his family. At the now rescheduled party of AJ, Tony's son, Artie is venting to Tony and his friends about the fact that you can work all your life just to have it burn up in front of you. Tony consolidates Artie and notices in the distance Christopher is on the phone. When Tony approaches Christopher, Christopher makes a remark about receiving praise for a job well done involving a murder he had performed. This progresses to a point where Christopher says he could sell his life story as a screenplay and make millions. Tony grabs Chris by the collar and says it's wannabe gangsters making movies that's ruining the rich tradition of culture and crime, which is weird because Carmela told the priest earlier in the episode that Tony loves The Godfather Part 2 when they were watching movies. Tony comes to reason with Chris, stating, "You think I haven't gotten offers before? Forget the distractions. There's work to do. It is, after all, a beautiful day. What could go wrong?" Cutting to a car full of the worst people ever, it's Junior and Olivia, Tony's mom. Uncle June is giving his sister-in-law a ride to the party. They complain about the younger generation verbatim, stating, "kids these days," when, keep in mind, referring to a middle-aged man. They talk about how things are different from back in the day, most notably with Tony's father, Johnny, and Tony. Junior insinuates that Tony may need to be killed in the future, and Tony's mother has no response. Olivia and Junior arrive at the party, and the scene fades to black. What I've just described to you is the plot summary of the Sopranos pilot episode. If this story sounds interesting to you, it is. I would highly recommend watching the show. I haven't watched till the end, certain circumstances, but I've seen quite enough to talk about one of the major themes you'll probably notice. I'm actually on season 6. I'm on the last 4 episodes, but I said I wouldn't watch them without a friend. I hope he's not watching them without me, but I promised him that I'd wait for him for the last 4. From what we covered, you can already see that Tony is skeptical of the newer generations, especially with the characters of Christopher and, as the series goes on, his own children. Furthering on this point, Tony is skeptical of previous generations as well. Throughout the series, Olivia, his mother, and Junior, his uncle, actually become primary antagonists due to their willingness to cling to the old ways. When taking a deeper look at the characters of Uncle June and Olivia, we can peel the layers back through certain dialogue that illustrates this isn't about tradition, it's about control. They put Tony's father on this pedestal, a peak icon, a man's man, because in short, he's dead.
If Tony's dad had lived long enough, they would eventually have a negative thing to say about him too. But since he's preserved by death and the effect time has on memory, he's a saint. This treatment isn't exclusive to Tony, strictly, but it is the most extreme, with the pair escalating the conflict to attempted murder. We can see what I would call the bloody golden generation of June and Olivia's tendency to go against anyone who's not from their time. This is as immediate as the second episode. Christopher begins to make unsanctioned actions to bring in additional revenue, which catches the attention of Junior. Junior calls Chris a loose cannon, Chris pretty much calls Junior a dinosaur, and so on. Tony takes Christopher's side reluctantly, but has albeit a more compassionate outlook, but same speculative thoughts on younger generations, especially with Chris's choice in friends. Throughout the series, you can see the development of AJ and Meadow, and their relationship with the older generations as well. AJ becomes more socially aware of his place in the world while also gaining deeper insight into fields of philosophy and even taking on nihilism for like a season, which then spans to become a lasting depression. During this time, he seeks answers from those around him for existential questions that have built up. Notably, he asks his father's friend, P's son, and his grandmother, Olivia. P explains at the batting cages that sometimes in life you have to do things that you don't want to. Junior in this case AJ, stumps him by asking why. That is, until P's son talks about how AJ is misunderstanding the writings of Camus, and that he should revisit the first chapters of Nietzsche. Following the batting cages, AJ visits his grandmother who tells him the world is a jungle. None of it makes sense and what makes you so special as to deserve more. Each generation had their own outlook on the situation, even those who would be considered his peers. In the future episodes, Junior, the old man, progresses to the advanced stages of dementia and unintentionally shoots Tony, who he believed to be a home intruder, maybe. This is years after Junior's initial intentional hit had been called off. AJ, believing Junior to have made a genuine attempt on his father's life, heads to Junior's location with a knife seeking revenge. I feel this represents how the conflict isn't only with overlaying generations, but every non-sequitur generation in general. With that said, The Sopranos is not a show where there's constant war for power between the different age groups. Oftentimes, they team up or share similarities not openly apparent. Throughout the series, despite their willingness to admit the fact of, each generation follows their own mental health problems and struggles throughout the life of crime. Tony's father, Johnny, is revealed to have suffered from the same blackouts, which eventually start to affect AJ as well. More importantly, they talk about depression, with Olivia being one of the most staunch deniers but suffers severely from the condition, expressing similar symptoms to Tony. Everyone becomes depressed and experiences a general disconnect from those around them. The Sopranos constantly demonstrates that it's hard enough to have a family unit and cohesion without including the elements of organized crime. Another prominent message demonstrated throughout the series relating to the generational gap is that no one is absolutely in the right with their opposing assumptions of each other. In one episode, Junior begins a side hustle of selling cocaine on garbage truck routes, something that maybe could have been overlooked in the 60s, but in present day will land you in prison for life. Tony is quick to put a stop to this little side biz of Junior's after learning of it, stating the DEA would be so far up their ass, which, absolutely, they would. This example of being out of touch isn't limited to just Junior. Tony consistently shows his wisdom, but also his own display of ignorance when it comes to Christopher. Christopher shows an exceptional trait of ambition. He's constantly on the prowl for new relevant streams of income, and albeit they are a little misguided, Tony's guidance would excel in this facet of both men's lives. Adding a layer of forethought to each new revenue stream could turn them into a significant investment. When it comes to The Sopranos, it's what my girlfriend calls a drama, it's what I call a dark comedy, especially with the right crowd, minus a few episodes in particular. Overall, the running story revolves around a literal family, or a crime family. The plot is always focused on the interrelationship between the characters, though. Conflicts are often, never, natural disasters or even worldly problems. The cast of The Sopranos for the most part live in an isolated bubble of North Jersey and New York in the late 90s and early 2000s. This may also apply to your life as well if you live in like a community bubble. For example, there are references to 9/11 which oddly start popping up in 2007 for the show, but yeah, they don't really mention it during actual 2001. But the extent to which it affects the characters is limited to AJ at most, and his disillusion with the society could be a million other factors. Tony has a thing with terrorists, but he's not really clinging to that. He's super racist against black people, though. This means that oftentimes characters need a complexity to them not often seen in other shows. Complexity such as the psychological layers, drug addiction, or multifaceted origins. Oftentimes, because of this need for depth, the actors don't feel like they're delivering great lines. It feels as though it's a fly-on-the-wall experience for the viewer. This is why I think the show is such a great pick for this example of this whole video. We focused on ancient Rome, and then I saw a quote from The Sopranos, and it made me think of this. It helps me illustrate the point that we're not necessarily falling as a people, but we certainly are changing. Through examination of the overlay of what I've brought to you today, I've come up with what I would call a valid takeaway, and that is, hear everyone out, even just a little bit. I've gathered this little message from the sheer fact that yes, we've had a few setbacks to where we are now, but the desire for growth and progress has never faded. Collapse all we want, but it's never the end. Listen to the old folks, listen to the young folks. Despite our apparent separation from one another, we're all in this together. If you enjoyed this video, I really appreciate it. It's good to be back. Had a lot going on, yeah, you know how it is. But yeah, I hope this video turned out good. Yeah, I love you guys. Bye. Like and subscribe. I have merch. Buy shit.
What's up, my fellow Homo sapiens? How's evolution treating you? Enjoying that pattern-seeking brain? Ah, good. Me neither. With the upcoming release of the latest installment in the Planet of the Apes series right around the corner, I thought I would give my 2 cents on speculative evolution, so to speak. I know it seems that primates have this whole dominant species thing on lock. We can't just graze over some of the other intelligent species that could one day give us a run for our money. In this video, we'll be exploring a world where humans have died out, either due to our own hubris or a giant rock. But nonetheless, a world without humans, and who or what is going to take our place as the next owners of Earth. Essentially, this video is asking, who's next? Okay, so first things first, we do have to address the elephant in the room. As you may be aware, sentience, as we humans experience, is not the end goal of evolution. We're a fluke, an anomaly. Things aren't inherently going to walk on 2 legs and evolve to use tools because it's not the natural state of that species. It's only because of a million things lining up that we turned out the way we did. We're speculated to have gained intelligence through adaptations, or in other words, those who had intelligence got to pass their genes because that trait was desirable to other intelligent humans, who were being killed a lot less. Do that dance for millions of years and bam, you get what we have today. Walking, talking Homo sapiens. Some say evolution for the human race was stagnated because in shorter terms, everyone gets to be now. We're all reproducing. Is it nice to have a mate who can do taxes and advanced tool usage? Yes, but it's not a requirement for you or your offspring's survival. Others speculate evolution occurs in leaps and bounds due to external forces. If it gets cold, like Ice Age cold, really fast, then those with higher natural body temps, hair, etc., will be able to spread their genes before, dying. I'd say it's probably a mix for both. Human intelligence is still a sought-after trait, and not everyone lives in the bubble of a first-world country where we can just pick mates willy-nilly. Smart people, or what we currently consider smart, seem to do better in life. For animals, humans are the Ice Age, or in other words, that major event that leads to the evolution of the species. A little depressing, but a good example of this is a pizzly bear. Don't you mean grizzly bear? Well, I would if I was talking about them. Now shut up. Due to the impact humans have had on the climate, polar bears from the north are coming further south and meeting up with grizzly bears. These 2 separate bears combine to make a pizzly bear. In broad view, the pizzly bear is a notably distinct example, but in reality, humans have altered the evolutionary track of every species on Earth through one way or another. Even our conservation efforts offset what species are supposed to be around and what aren't, because in short, we don't know what's naturally being phased out because of our all-encompassing nature, so it's better to try and save every species. With the lack of humans in our scenario, it presents a unique opening for every other species that's essentially been suppressed during our stint in power. So with us gone, let's go through a list of, as we've said, who's next? Starting us out is the most obvious, primates, or apes, more generally. The smartest of this little subsect of mammals are what we call orangutans, but other apes like chimpanzees and their distant cousins bonobos aren't far off either. These creatures are shockingly close to humans, with our shared DNA having 99% in common, and boy, does it show. Apes have a highly sophisticated lifestyle. They communicate both verbally and non-verbally. Apes are highly social creatures similar to us people, and have shown higher levels of function through their use of tools. Additionally, apes also know how to lie and manipulate one another. A woman by the name of Dr. Jane Goodall became famous for her work with these majestic creatures. Through her research, Goodall found several groundbreaking discoveries that only demonstrated how close we really are, and how eerily similar their path to evolution reflects our own. Apes are shown to follow social hierarchies as well as a greater societal awareness with other apes. Incredibly emotional and sensitive creatures, apes will show signs of mourning at the loss of members in their groupings. They also adopt orphans, in so many words, to raise as their own. Apes have also been shown to use tools to assist in obtaining food, as well as going to war with other groups. Goodall once recounted her experience witnessing the ape war, where she observed barbaric savagery to the point the parents ate their offspring. This would be called the Gombe Ape War if you want to look more into this. Where apes lack our direct intelligence, they more than make up in physical strength and ability. Apes have more of a particular type of muscle fiber that allows for intense, raw, explosive strength, about 1.5 to 2 times greater than that of a human. We're great at endurance running, it's one of our buffs up there with language, but if a gorilla catches you, consider yourself dead. Despite their impressive physical stature and skills, apes also show a propensity to learn. Coco the gorilla, born in the 1970s, was an extraordinary example of ape learning capacity, taking on sign language, even being able to express her wants and desires through nonverbal language. If somehow, apes survive an event that takes out humans, I think it's only a matter of time till we see Humans the Redux Season 1. Moving on, let's take a deep-sea dive into our local oceans and see who waits for us there. Oh, well, would you look at that? It's an octopus, and he's tending to his garden. While not as easily comparable as ape intelligence, octopi have a lot of qualities that place them high up on the list. Their use of appendages to navigate the ocean floor are great environmental adaptations. They use these tentacles to extract shellfish for food, and have been shown to even be able to solve mazes and puzzles. Octopi have a unique brain structure that is so alien to humans that we still don't know how to accurately test their intelligence in comparison to ours. Their brain goes throughout their entire body, with each limb or tentacle having a slight degree of independence, all working together to make this cephalopod move and dance. However, octopi do have some factors working against the species, namely, they're shut-ins. Octopi don't interact with one another as they're not social creatures, and about every major predator in the ocean you can think of likes to feast on these fellas. Which could be a good thing if we were looking for smarter octopi, but it could also keep the population numbers well in check. I thought that the octos made a worthy contender because if they can solve mazes, who's to say they're not on track to use tools and defend themselves, or begin using their camouflage as a form of communication amongst each other. Speaking of predatory aquatic animals, let's move on to the next one. Despite living in the ocean, dolphins are some of the smartest mammals next to humans. Dolphins, in case you're new on Earth, live in the ocean. They look like fish, but they're not. Fish are relatively dumb at being people, but they're sure great at being fish. I mean, look at this. Dolphins are all queued up to take the stage as our next contender. Big selling points are, they're social creatures and they do a little something called communication. The most intelligent of these dolphin species is known to be called a bottlenose. Bottlenose dolphins have a few things going for them over the rest of dolphin kind. Bottlenose dolphins are said to have the most advanced speech patterns, as well as a demonstration and willingness to use tools. These particular dolphins will use the sea sponges to protect their snouts and dig up food on the sea floor. Through my research, I've noted 2 needed traits to put you on track for being a higher evolved species. These 2 traits, I argue, are an ability to communicate with a social grouping, and the willingness or desire to use tools, albeit even if those tools are other organisms. To further our discussion on dolphins, let's take a look at another scientist and what their discoveries unearthed on these flippered friends of ours. Margaret Lovett was living in the Caribbean and had been working on various experiments and tests regarding dolphins. It was in 1964 Lovett's career would receive a serious reputation boost. NASA, wanting to prepare for the possibility of discovering extraterrestrial life, built this crazy lab called a dolphinarium, where they would try and teach dolphins a human language. This was to prepare for the language of the aliens we had not found yet. So instead of trying to learn or understand aliens, we instead wanted to teach the aliens English. Unfortunately, after some unethical behavior by the research team, the project never availed to any substantial success. Oh, you want to know of the complications? Well, Lovett worked closely with a male dolphin by the name of Peter. Peter would have urges that interrupted the lessons, and Dr. Lovett, in an attempt to progress further, would satisfy these urges, scientifically. The news media would catch wind of this, and you know how that goes. Additionally, Lovett's boss, John Lilly, was working on another experiment involving LSD, and was documented to be administering the new experimental drug to the dolphins. The LSD seemingly had no effect, but is interesting because if you're familiar with the stoned ape theory of evolution, then it's not a crazy reach to think maybe something new would happen. The theory of the stoned ape states humans in a proto-state gained sentience because of our ingestion of psilocybin mushrooms. These mushrooms, giving us imagination and thought, turned us into what we are today. Though not a hallucinogenic, some dolphins are known to take a little nibble out of pufferfish because their neurotoxins are known to act as a type of narcotic to the mammals. Besides some one-off fumbles on our part, dolphins are extremely intelligent creatures. Showing problem-solving skills, an ability to mourn as well, they feel a wide array of emotional spectrums, and they can think in abstracts, as well as being able to conceptualize betrayal and other more intricate concepts. If the land is no longer suitable for life, then the oceans may be the next place we see our superspecies emerge. This next one is pretty interesting, maybe even the most interesting. We move back to land only to go into a hive. What's in this hive? Well, it's bees. A bunch of them too. Yes, you heard me right. Bees. You probably don't think about bees too often, but these little fellows are some of, if not the smartest creatures of all insects. First off, let's take a look at those two big factors I mentioned earlier. Let's see if bees are social creatures by asking one. Yep, they're social alright, but do they use tools? Bees kind of use tools, more so they're in their stone age, using raw materials to make things, rather than using the raw materials to make things to help make things. You dig? Bees show tremendous innovation. They even know how to count and be trained to do other tasks like recognize human faces. These little guys have a complex form of communication, on a much higher level than that of most animals. Through a series of nonverbal expression like odors and body movements, bees can communicate a vast array of information like where to find food, encroaching predators, and what a unionized goal should be. United goals, like building a hive. Bees have a natural instinct to build hives. Placement being determined on factors like temperature, surrounding pollen density, airflow, etc. Bees produce wax with a gland on their abdomen. It takes roughly 6 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. A huge benefit going for bees and I guess all insects is that they evolve way faster than us mammals. Shorter lifespans mean faster reproduction, which means faster adaptation. This also means that bugs are really well off when it comes to the need for sudden adaptations following a change in environment. Bees, as great as they are, do have some weak points. Bees answer to a queen, an almost subspecies of regular bees. These queen bees are in charge of giving off pheromones to unite the hive and, more importantly, lay as many eggs as possible. Queens are the only female bees in the hive with fully developed ovaries, meaning that they are the sole bearers of the hive's population growth. If a queen is killed, it could very well mean certain death for that unlucky hive. Additionally, queen bees are not friendly to another. When a queen is nearing death, either because of old age or illness, the hive will begin a contingency plan to install the next new queen. When the new queen is born, she will kill the old one. This is going to create a problem when bee groups encounter each other, as even if they're running the show of their own hive, it's hardwired into queen bees to kill each other. With all that talk of bees, we move on to our finale. Can I get a drum roll, please? The next species to inherit the Earth will be... no one. Yep, that's right. If we went missing tomorrow, most likely things would just go on without a resurfacing of what we deem as sentient life to our level. Environments would begin to heal, with the natural dominant apex predators taking the top of the food chain. The world would go on as it did for a majority of history, with uniquely intelligent animals in their own right acting as what we've come to separate ourselves from. If I had to speculate, there'd probably be an emergence of new species to fill niches humans have kept closed off, either through terraforming our planet for our needs, or that we've driven to extinction. And though it is possible that all the animals I've talked about in this video could be forming vast super civilizations in millions of years, the chances of such a feat are very slim, if anything at all. You have to remember, dinosaurs, any dinosaurs at the peak of the Triassic period, weren't trying to build farms and begin an agrarian revolution. It was just another ecosystem without humans. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe. I'd be really interested in hearing what animals you think be on the path to sapience, so let me know in the comments down below. With all that said, I'm Gideon, and peace out.
holy shit, you watched 3 hours of content. Not to, well, almost 4. You watched 4 hours of my content. If you made it to the end and are watching this, I appreciate you. You're amazing. You may want to consider hopping over to my website where I sell merch, because if you've made it to this point, the dedication is unreal. So, yes. I've got merch. I appreciate you, my super fans, and I hope you have a long and bountiful bloodline.